Previously, on Dragon Ball Defiance. When the tyrant Frieza wiped out Planet Vegeta, Bardock defied the end of his race. Escaping the carnage with 400 Saiyans, he led them to a new world they named New Sadala. But the cost of survival was high. Gine is gone, leaving Bardock to raise Kakarot as a single father with only his closest allies by his side. Peace was short-lived as internal politics ignited turmoil within the ranks. Bardock solidified his rule by crushing the Leviathan, but the division left them scarred. Turles, Rudaba, and a band of defectors fled the planet, only to be captured by Frieza's forces. Now, the secret is out. Frieza sent his armored squadron. The Saiyans defeated them, but New Sadala was compromised. Frieza's fleet was coming, so they evacuated. 368 Saiyans crammed into 2 ships, drifting into the unknown, running from a tyrant who would never stop hunting them. While restocking fuel and gathering intel on Outpost Kasara, they learned of the wish-granting orbs, the Dragon Balls, hidden on a distant world of green-skinned people called the Namekians. Things are getting real. This is Dragon Ball Defiance.
He was dreaming, and he knew it, the way a soldier always knows. The dream did not begin, it assembled. Red rock under a sky the color of old copper. Wind in the dry grass, the smell of cordite, and something sweeter beneath it that he would not name, even asleep. The fragments arrived out of order, the way the past arrives when the mind has decided, for reasons of its own, that tonight is the night. Muezli's shoulder guard cracked open under a clean shot, and Muezli went down without a sound. The shot had come from above and behind, and the angle had told him everything he needed to know about how the rest of the mission was going to go. Leek's voice on the comm. Bardock, report. The dream skipped. He was Uzaru. The body was the size of a small hill, and the body was on the 3rd hour of the rampage, and the body had stopped counting the buildings it had taken apart. He came down the avenue of the Cerealian town with a hand the size of a wagon, and laid the hand on the roof of a stone building the Cerealians had built for worship, and he pulled. The roof came away in his fist. The walls held. He looked down into the broken interior with a Saiyan's red Uzaru eye, and the eye saw, behind an overturned altar, a woman crouched with her arms around her son. She looked up at him. She did not run. She raised her hand, and a thin beam of ki shot from her index finger and grazed the line of his Uzaru shoulder, where the hide met the joint. A small, contemptible strike from a civilian who had decided to die between him and her child. The Uzaru did not feel it. The man inside the Uzaru did. He looked at her. He looked at the boy. Something in the rage state cracked. He did not, in the cracking, name what he saw. The mind had not given him the words for it yet. The body had. The body had registered the woman the way the body would. The roof was in his fist, and the woman was at his feet, and the body knew. He came down. The reversion was not clean. It was the reversion of a Saiyan whose rage state had been broken by something below the level of rage, and the reversion took the rest of the avenue with it as his mass collapsed inward. He arrived on the broken floor of the building in his own body, on one knee, the cloak of his armor scorched and the graze on his shoulder open and bleeding from the woman's beam. He looked up at her at her own level. "I am going to take you out of this building," he said. "I am going to take you somewhere the squad will not look. Will you come with me?" The woman looked at him. She looked at him for the length of a count he did not measure, and then she nodded. The mountains, the climb, the woman moving fast with the boy in her arms. The graze on his shoulder a small, steady ache. He had marked, on the scouter before he had switched it off, the signature of someone living alone in the foothills above the operational zone. They reached his home at the 3rd hour. He was green and small and older than any of them. He set the boy on a stone bench inside the cave, and a green light came out of his hand that Bardock had no frame of reference for. The boy's breathing steadied. The healer turned to Bardock and reached for the grazed shoulder without ceremony, and the same green light went into the wound and the ache stopped. The healer met his eyes. "You are not what they sent." "No." "Why?" Bardock did not answer. The healer nodded once, the way an old man nods at an answer he has already received in some other language, and turned back to the boy. The woman, kneeling beside her son, spoke for the first time. Muezli. And this is my boy. Granolah. The healer inclined his head. Monaito. The healer's hand came off the boy's chest, and the boy slept. Bardock stood at the cave mouth and watched the smoke in the lower slopes. The smoke was thicker than it had been an hour ago, and the smoke was moving in the wrong direction for ordinary weather. He had been a soldier long enough to read smoke. The squad was sweeping in a wider radius than the morning's orders had authorized, and the radius was tightening, and the cave was not far enough above the operational zone to be outside it for much longer. He turned back into the house. Frieza force will be on this slope within the hour, he said. We cannot stay. The healer looked at him. The boy, bring him. We move up. Muezli was already lifting the boy. The healer gathered what he gathered from the cave, a small bundle, a flask, a length of cloth, and pulled his cloak around his shoulders, and they went up. They climbed for the better part of the day. The healer climbed without speaking. Bardock walked behind them with his eyes on the slopes below and his scouter off because the scouter was a signature, and the signature was a thing he was not going to broadcast. They reached the mountaintop ridge. The ridge was a long, flat shoulder of rock with a steep drop on the far side and a shallower one on the near side, and the steep side dropped 200 meters into a broad bowl of red rock that the day's heat had emptied of anything that lived in it. They stopped at the lip of the ridge to rest. The healer set the boy down against a rock. Muezli sat beside him with her hand on his back. Bardock stood at the lip with his hands on his hips and looked down into the bowl. The bowl was not empty. He registered the 4 figures before he registered the voices. They were at the floor of the bowl, 200 meters below, gathered in the small open space between 2 outcrops. All turquoise in the late light, the family resemblance unmistakable even at this distance. They had not seen the ridge. They were turned inward, toward each other, talking. Bardock dropped flat against the lip of the ridge. The healer and Muezli saw him drop and did the same without being told. The voices carried up the bowl in the way voices carry across hard rock at dusk. Fragments, mostly. The wind took some of it. What it left was enough. When Frieza is finished with the Saiyans, we move. The lizard is going to do most of the work for us, brother. We wait. And we sell the rest to whoever pays the better margin when the smoke clears. Yes. Bardock did not move from the lip. Heeters, plotting against Frieza. The voices continued. He turned his head slowly to look at Muezli and the healer. He raised one finger to his lips. They nodded. He turned his head back to the bowl. The boy stirred. The healer's sleep touch was wearing off, the way the green light wore off when its subject had been in motion. The boy stirred and his eyes opened, and the boy did not know where he was, and the boy did not know who the man at the lip of the ridge was, and the boy did not know why his mother was lying flat against rock with her hand on his back, and the boy, in the way of small, terrified children waking in unfamiliar places, did the worst possible thing. He got up. He walked. He walked 3 steps forward, out from the cover of the rock he had been propped against, into the open space at the lip of the ridge where the dusk was still bright enough to silhouette him against the sky. Muezli was already reaching. Monaito made the boy fall asleep. She came up off the rock in a single motion with her arm extended for the back of her son's collar, and the motion was the motion of a mother reading exactly what was about to happen, and the motion was a half-second too late. Her hand closed on the collar at the moment the boy was already in silhouette against the sky, and the closing pulled him back, and the pull made the silhouette move, and the movement caught the eye of the tall one in the bowl below. The tall one, Elec, looked up. He looked at the ridge. He looked at the small silhouette of a Cerealian boy being yanked back by a Cerealian woman. He looked at the woman. His face did not move. Bardock was already moving. He came up off the lip of the ridge at speed and stepped past Muezli and the boy and walked forward into the open space the boy had walked into, and he made himself visible to the bowl below, his armor clear in the dusk, and he raised one hand in the gesture of a soldier hailing across distance. "Saiyan!" he called down. "Frieza force! Operation in progress!" Elec did not respond immediately. The others had registered him now too. "The survivors!" Bardock called down. "I chased them up the ridge. They didn't make it far. I'm taking it from here. A count." Elec fired. The shot went past Bardock's left shoulder at the angle that took it directly into Muezli's chest. And Muezli, who had been standing a half step behind Bardock and slightly to his left, because she had been doing exactly what Bardock had told her to do, was suddenly not standing anymore. She fell. The healer was already moving. He came up at Muezli's side and his hands were on the wound, and the green light was on it, and the green light was not enough. The light was for closing cuts and resetting joints. It was not for what had been put through her. She died with the healer's hands still on the wound, and the boy still on Bardock's hip, and her eyes on her son's face. Bardock was already moving. He set the boy down behind him in a single motion, and his right hand came up at speed, his palm filled with the key he had been holding banked since the tall one had crested the ridge, and he fired at the tall one at point blank with a riot javelin he did not bother to compress. The blast would have taken them off the ridge. It did not. A wall of force materialized between Bardock and the Heeters, and the blast struck the wall and dispersed sideways across the ridge in a wide, flat arc, and the wall held. It was gas. Elec said to him, "Take care of this for me, please. The Namekian is interesting. The Saiyan is not." Everyone except Gas were already moving back down the ridge at the unhurried pace they had come up. Gas extended his hand. A weapon materialized in it. Bardock set his stance. The fight that followed was the fight from the cliff. Gas was faster than anything Bardock had ever fought. The mace dissolved mid-strike and became a spear, and the spear came in at a different angle entirely, and Bardock turned his hip, and the spear went past his ribs by the width of a finger. The spear dissolved and became a blade. The blade dissolved and became a chain. Bardock was retreating across the slope, and his body was operating on the trained reflex of a Saiyan combat record that ran the length of his life, and it was not enough. Gas unleashed his inner nature. A compression of light around his shoulders that resolved into a corona. A pulse of pressure that rolled outward across the slope. The spear caught him. It came in low, and Bardock turned his head, and the spear caught him across the left cheek, from the bridge of his nose to the line of his jaw. A clean cut. And then a second cut, crossing the first, as Gas pivoted the haft and dragged the spear point back across the cut he had just made. The dream slowed there, on the cross-stroke, on the precise instant the scar was being written into his face. Gas was on him before he could recover. He had Bardock by the throat, lifted, the slope's edge under his heels. His other hand closed on the base of Bardock's tail. He pulled. Bardock watched the tail come off from a little to the side, because that was what he had learned to do, a long time ago, with pain that was beyond bearing. He did not scream. Gas tossed the tail off the slope, and it was a small, dark shape in the late light, and then it was gone. "You're going to die here," Gas said, having protected exactly no one. "The boy will die. The old man will die. The woman is dead. You will die." "The woman is dead." The sentence landed. Bardock's throat was being crushed. He spoke through it anyway. Not atonement, not revenge, only victory, a breath. In a life and death battle. Something in Bardock's chest opened. A heat that began somewhere below the sternum and climbed. The knuckles brighter. The veins under the skin running a color he did not have a word for. His ki rose past anything he had ever measured in himself. The air around him took on a red cast, and the rock under his feet began to crack from heat rather than pressure, and Gas's hand on his throat opened in pure reflex, because the throat it was holding had become too hot to hold. He fell 2 steps backward and his hands came up, and the red was around them now, a low burning corona that pulsed with his pulse. Gas stared. What is that? Bardock closed the distance. Gas's weapons formed and shattered on contact. His inner nature output, which had been pressing Bardock backward across the slope a minute ago, could not hold against the red. Bardock gathered the red into his right palm, the palm filled with light. The light compressed until it was the size of a fist. Gas saw what was coming and tried to set his guard. Bardock fired. The blast took Gas in the sternum and laid him out on the rock a long way from where he had been standing. He did not get up. Bardock was on his knees. He had not noticed kneeling. "Bardock!" The voice was higher and from another direction, and it was the kind of voice that had never in its life had to hurry. Elec stepped back onto the slope. He had not gone far. He had come back because the explosion of the red had carried down the slope to him, and the carry had been a thing he had wanted to see the end of. He was perfectly composed. He looked at his brother laid out on the rock, and his expression did not change. He drew the sidearm from his hip with the small, economical motion of a man who had drawn it before. He looked at Bardock. "Remarkable," he said. His voice was pleasant. "Truly. I'll be thinking about that for some time." He leveled the sidearm. He aimed at Bardock's chest, and at the last moment, adjusted his aim 2 inches to the left, and fired. The shot went through Bardock's right arm above the elbow. The arm went numb from the shoulder down. The slope's edge that had been on his right was now in front of him, and his balance, which had been the only thing holding him upright, was gone. He fell. He did not feel the bottom. Something caught him before the bottom, something green and warm and gentle. He was being held against an old chest by a thin old arm that should not have been strong enough to hold a grown Saiyan, and was. The dream paled at the edges. He saw, from somewhere outside himself, his own body carried back up the slope on the healer's back. He saw the sleeping boy, the boy who would wake without his mother in the morning. He saw himself reach the pod where he had landed that morning. He saw himself sit at the controls, and on the small reflective surface above the launch panel, he saw his own face for the first time with the scar on it. He saw himself acknowledge it. He saw himself key the launch sequence and lift off. The dream paled further. He woke. The quarters were dark and very still. The aurora was up over the eastern ridge, and it was throwing a slow green and violet wash across the wall opposite the bed, which was the wash he had woken to most mornings for the last 2 years. His heart was running at a pace it had not run at in his sleep for a long time. His breath was loud in his own ears. He sat up. He sat for a count without moving. The dream did not so much fade as set, the way a thing sets in cooling metal, taking a shape he was going to have to live with. He raised his right hand to his face. He touched the scar. He had touched the scar before. He had touched it 1,000 times in the years since he had earned it, in the shaving water and under the rinse after sparring, and absently while thinking about something else. And every time he had touched it, it had been a thing that was simply on his face. Tonight, it was not simply on his face. Tonight, it was a place where the spear had crossed and recrossed, a place he could feel the angle of, a place that knew how it had been made. He lowered the hand to his right arm and touched the spot above the elbow where Elec's shot had gone through. There was no scar there. The shot had been small, and the wound had closed clean over the years, and the skin was smooth. He touched it anyway. He touched the place where the entry had been, and the place where the exit had been, and he held 2 fingers on each spot for a count, and then he let his hand drop. He reached behind himself. His tail was where it should be, wrapped loose around his waist in the sleeping position. It had grown back. It had finished growing back well before any of this. Before the colony, before Kakarot, before the 7 ships had lifted off Planet Vegeta and the rest of his life had begun. And it had been a part of his body for so long now that he did not think about it. He laid his hand on it for a count. He felt his own pulse in it. He let it go. 3 places. He sat in the dark for a long time after that. He did not move from the bed. He did not light the lamp. The aurora moved on the wall, and the colony slept around him, and he sat with his hands open on his knees, and he understood, slowly, what the dream had come to tell him. He had not forgotten Cereal. He had remembered Cereal in fragments for 5 years, and the fragments had been the events. The fragments had been Muezli going down, and the climb in the mountains, and the cliff, and the spear, and the fall. The fragments had not been the thing in the middle. The thing in the middle, the heat that had climbed out of his sternum, the red around his hands, the ceiling he had pushed through, the spending, that he had not remembered. The body had remembered. The body had carried it for 5 years without telling him. And tonight, for reasons he was not going to interrogate, the body had decided to tell him. He had been carrying the ability inside him without knowing it was still there. He did not yet know what to do with that. He sat with it. After a while, he stood. He crossed to the basin in the corner and rinsed his face in the cold water. He stood for a count over the basin with his palms braced on the rim, and he looked into the small reflective surface above it the way he had looked at the console surface in the dream, and he saw his own face, with the scar on it, and he saw it new. He dressed. He went to find Tora first. Tora was already awake. Tora was always already awake, sitting on his flat stone at the edge of the training yard with a cup of something hot in his hands and the aurora on his shoulders. Tora looked at him as he approached, and Tora said nothing because Tora knew when Bardock was coming to him with something that needed the room cleared. "Call the council," Bardock said. "Now?" "Now." Tora set the cup down. Subject. Bardock did not answer immediately. He stood at the edge of the training yard with the aurora on him and looked at the eastern ridge where the colony's day was about to begin, and he chose his words. "The people who have been hunting us," he said finally. "I know who they are. I have known for years. I forgot I knew." Tora looked at him for a count. "All right," Tora said. He stood and went to wake the others. The council chamber was a room with a low ceiling and a wooden table with 5 chairs. Parsa came in first because the medical bay was closest. Brassic came in next, already shaved, already in the dark gray and bronze armor he wore to council, the way another man might wear a coat. Fasha came in last, with her hair still wet from the basin, and a question already on her face that she did not voice. Tora was at the door. Cress was in the doorway behind him, with her hands full of a portable console she had brought from her station, because she could already tell, from the hour and from Bardock's face, that she was going to need it. Vegeta was not summoned. Vegeta held military command without a seat, and the council met without him by long-standing arrangement. The prince was in the training yard at this hour, and he would be briefed by Tora later. Bardock did not sit. He stood at the head of the table, with his hands resting flat on the table in front of him, and he waited until the room had settled, and then he spoke. "Before the evacuation," he said, "I ran a purge mission on a planet called Cereal." He let that sit. "The target was the native population, the standard operation. I executed the plan as briefed." Brassic's jaw moved very slightly. Brassic had been in the Frieza force long enough to know what the standard operation had looked like, and Brassic did not flinch at the words, but the words landed. They were landing on everyone. "I encountered a Cerealian woman in a hut in the foothills. She was protecting her child. I looked at her and I looked at the child and I saw..." He stopped. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. "I reported the hut as cleared. I took the woman and the child into the mountains, and I took them to an old man. I had heard about him from one of the captives the squad had taken. I hid them with him." He paused. He had not said any of this out loud in 5 years. The saying of it was harder than the dream had been. The healer's name was Monaito, I think. Old, green-skinned. Cress cuts and says, "So you probably met a Namekian." Bardock interjects, "Probably." "During the extraction," Bardock went on, "I observed 4 figures in a creek bed below the ridge I was crossing. I overheard a fragment of their conversation. The fragment was about Frieza. The fragment was about moving a timeline forward after the Saiyans were finished." He looked at Cress. "I am going to give you names now," he said. "I want you to find everything we have on them by the end of the day." Cress set the portable console on the table and opened it. "Go." They called themselves the Heater. Cress's fingers stopped over the console for 1 second and then resumed. Elec is probably their head. Turquoise skin, tall, refined. Cress was writing. A sister named Macki, athletic build, younger. Cress was writing. A brother named Oil, heavy-set, slow. Cress was writing. And a 4th. He paused over the 4th. A brother named Gas. Cress looked up at him. Gas is the family's combat asset. He was younger than the others when I encountered him. He is not now. 5 years ago, he was already operating at a tier I should not have survived contact with. He intercepted me on a cliff during the extraction. He fought me. He defeated me physically across most of the engagement, and then He stopped. He had not planned to say any of the next part. He looked down at his own hands, scarred and rough and present day, and he did not have a word for what he was going to describe. He decided, in the silence, not to describe it, not yet, not until he understood it. "And then I somehow managed to stop him," he said. "I will not characterize the engagement further at this time. I will be discussing it with Parsa privately." Parsa's eyes came up. "The relevant fact for the council," Bardock went on, "is that I won, barely. Gas survived. The fight was interrupted by his brother Elec, who arrived after the fact and shot me off the cliff. Monaito recovered me at the bottom. I returned to my pod and lifted off. I have carried this on my face for 5 years." He touched the scar. "The Heeters hate Frieza," he said. "They were already plotting against him before the Saiyans were destroyed. They are motivated by capital. They are an intelligence operation as much as a combat one. If they are coming for us, and I am going to assume they are. They are not coming the way the squadron came. They are coming to price us. They are coming to sell us. The chamber was very quiet. Gas, Bardock said, will probably be coming for a rematch. He looked around the table. That is everything I have to give you this morning. The rest of what I know about them I am giving to Cress as she finds it. Council is open. Parsa spoke. She did not address the disclosure. She addressed the omission inside it. You said you would be discussing the engagement with me privately. I will. When? This morning. After this. She held his gaze for a count. All right, she said. Fasha had not spoken. Fasha was looking at him from her place at the table with an expression he could not read, and did not, in that moment, try to. She would speak to him later. She would speak to him when the others were not in the room. He let her keep her silence. Cress was still writing. She did not look up. I'll have a preliminary brief by midday, and a full picture by tonight if our intercepts have anything on these names. Bardock. Yes. The conversation you overheard in the creek bed, about moving the timeline forward? Yes. If the Heeters were plotting against Frieza 5 years ago, and they are coming for us now, the working assumption is that they are still plotting against Frieza, and we are the asset. We are not the target. We are the inventory. They need a lot of capital if they want to go against Frieza, and we will probably do that for them. So it's safe to say they will not sell us to Frieza. That is the working assumption, he said. The council sat with it. Tora, from the door, said, Then we get ready for buyers. That was the end of the meeting. Nobody called the close. The meeting ended because Tora's sentence was the sentence the meeting had come to, and there was nothing further to add until Cress had the brief. The council rose one by one. Brassic went out first, already drafting something in his head. Cress followed with the console still open. Parsa lingered a moment and looked at Bardock and tilted her head toward the door of the medical bay across the clearing, and he nodded once, and she went. Tora stayed in the doorway until the others had cleared, and then he stepped into the chamber and crossed to the head of the table. He did not speak. He put one hand on Bardock's shoulder. He left it there for a count. He took it away. The colony will hold, Tora said. I know. Tora went. Bardock stood at the head of the table for a long moment after the chamber had emptied. The aurora had paled. The morning was coming on outside, the colony's day starting, the small, ordinary sounds of waking carrying through the longhouse walls. He could hear Borgos at the perimeter sensor grid running his pre-dawn check. He could hear Shugesh's voice in the kitchen shelter, ordering someone to be careful with the flour, because the flour was not in fact infinite, no matter what people seemed to think. He stood with his hands on the stone table where they had been resting through the council, and he looked at them. They looked like his hands. They had not, on the cliff, looked like his hands. He picked them up off the table and he crossed the chamber, and he went to find Parsa. Because Parsa was going to want to know what he had not said in front of the others. And Bardock had decided, somewhere in the silence after Tora had taken his hand off his shoulder, that he was going to tell her. He owed at least one person in the colony the truth. The morning was cool, and the aurora was nearly gone, and the eastern ridge had the first light on it the color of a dilute red wine. The colony was waking. A child somewhere shouted something and was shushed by a mother. A door opened and closed. The wind off the ridge carried the smell of the cook fire and of last night's rain on stone. Bardock crossed the clearing toward the medical bay with his hand at his side and his scar on his face and the dream banked in his chest. And the day began. The medical bay was the warmest building in the colony at this hour, because Parsa kept it warm on principle. She had said once, years ago, that cold was a thing the body had to spend energy fighting, and there was no reason to make a body fight what could be solved with a stove. The stove was small and iron and old, and it had come off one of the original transports, and it was running now at a quiet draw because the morning was cool. The bay smelled of wood smoke and of the antiseptic Parsa made herself from a root Shugesh had identified for her in the second year. She was waiting at the work table when he came in. She had set out 2 cups. She had not asked anyone to come with her. She had not asked Bardock if he wanted anyone to come with him. She gestured at the bench. He sat. She sat across from him with her hands folded around her cup, and she did not speak for a count of 5. Parsa's silences were never empty. She used them the way she used a clean cloth on a wound to clear a working surface. Start at the part you didn't say, she said. He started at the part he hadn't said. He gave it to her plainly. The heat below the sternum, the hands changing, the red around them and the rise of the key past anything he had ever measured, the ceiling and the going through, the strike that had taken gas off his feet, the palm light he had gathered and the blast that had laid gas on the rock, the hollow afterward, the fall. He did not perform any of it. He gave her the facts the way he had given Tora his shoulder injuries after the squadron fight, in the dry register of a man making a report to a medic. Parsa listened without writing anything down. She drank from her cup once partway through, and then she set the cup down and folded her hands again and let him finish. When he had finished, she sat for a count. "All right," she said. "Tell me what you felt in your body after." "Hollow." "Define hollow." He thought about it. "Like I'd run a final spirit cannon. Not the body damage, He searched for the word. The spent. Like something had been taken out of me that I needed and was not going to get back for a while." Parsa nodded once. She had the look she got when she was filing something against a future case. "How long until you could stand?" "I don't know. I fell. Monaito caught me. Best guess. An hour? 2? And the arm Elec shot through. The numbness. How long did that take to come back?" He had not thought about this in 5 years. He thought about it now. "Days," he said. "Maybe a week. The pod was on autopilot for the first 2 days. I couldn't have flown it manually if I'd had to." Parsa's hands had unfolded. She was making a note now on the slate she kept by her cup, and the chalk was moving in the small, precise hand she used for things she wanted to keep. "The arm came back," she said. Eventually. And the rest of it, the spent. How long?" He thought about that one for longer. "Weeks," he said finally. "Maybe months. I don't know when it ended. I know I was not myself for a long time after Cereal. I assumed it was the mission. I assumed it was what I had done. I did not connect it to the..." He gestured vaguely at his own chest. "To that." Parsa wrote. She set the chalk down and looked at him. "Bardock. Yes. I'm going to tell you something and I want you to hear me. Go. I do not know what you reached on that cliff. I am not going to pretend I do. I am a medic, not a legend hunter. But I have been a medic for a long time, and I have been your medic for 2 years, and I know what the body looks like after it has spent something it did not have to spend." She paused. She let the pause do its work. "You did not have it to spend," she said, "whatever it was. Your body found it because the alternative was dying. Your body will find it again, because that is what bodies do once they have found a thing. But your body did not make it. Your body borrowed it. From you." He looked at her. "From my life," he said. "From whatever it is in you that keeps you alive. I do not have a more precise word than that. I will get one." He absorbed that. "Do not reach for it again," Parsa said. "I am not ordering you. I cannot order you. I am telling you, as your medic, that the body you brought back from Cereal was not the body that went to Cereal. And the next time you reach for it, the body that comes back will be less than the body that went in. Understood? I am not certain you do." He held her gaze. "I understand," he said. "I do not promise." She let out a breath through her nose that was not quite a laugh. "No," she said. "You wouldn't." "All right." She picked up the chalk and made one more note and set it down again. "One more thing. Go. The injury from the cannon against the Leviathan, the key channels. We rebuilt those across last few months. They are at baseline. They will hold up to ordinary combat at your present output. They will not hold up to a second reach for whatever you did on Cereal. If you reach for it again on those channels, we are not going to be rebuilding them again. We will be working with what is left. Understood? Good." She closed the slate. "Go eat something. You look like a man who watched himself fall off a cliff last night." "I did. I know. Go eat." He stood. He stopped at the door. "Parsa. Yes. Thank you." She waved a hand without looking up. "Eat," she said. He went. The colony's morning was on now in full. The cook fire was up. Children's voices carried from the school shelter where the morning lesson had started. The training yard had its first sparring pair on the packed dirt, and the sound of the contact and the breath of the fighters was the sound the colony made when it was alive. Bardock did not go to the kitchen shelter. He went to the family shelter. Fasha was at the small table near the window with a cup in her hands, and Kakarot on the floor at her feet. The boy upright on his small legs and intensely focused on the space between his own palms, which had a faint and unsteady golden warmth between them that he was working on holding steady. The palms wobbled, the warmth wobbled with them. He frowned at the wobble with the seriousness of a man trying to balance the books of a small kingdom. Fasha looked up when Bardock came in. She did not ask. She had not asked at the council. She did not ask now. She watched him cross the room and lower himself onto the bench across from her, and set his hands on the table, and she watched the hands, and she waited. "Parsa says I should eat," he said. "Parsa is right." She rose and went to the small stove in the corner and ladled something from the pot into a bowl and brought it to him and set it down. She did not return to her seat. She stood for a count beside the table, looking at the top of his head, and then she put her hand on the back of his neck, briefly, the way she sometimes did with Kakarot when the boy needed steadying. Her hand was warm. She let it stay there for a count. She took it away. She sat back down across from him. "Eat," she said. He ate. Kakarot, on the floor, registered Bardock's arrival the way he registered most things, late and with sudden enthusiasm. He abandoned the wobbling palm light and pivoted on his small feet and crossed the floor and arrived at Bardock's knee and reached up with both small hands. Up. Bardock set the spoon down and reached and lifted him onto his lap. Kakarot settled against his chest with the immediate gravitational certainty of a small body that knew where it was supposed to be. His tail wrapped once around Bardock's wrist on the way down and stayed there. "Bardock fight?" Kakarot said. He had picked the question up from somewhere and had been using it for weeks. He used it on everyone in the colony at least once a day. The answer was almost always, "Not today." Not today. Why? Because I'm eating. Kakarot considered this. The logic was acceptable. He laid his head against Bardock's collarbone and was quiet for a count. "Ma hurt?" he said. Bardock looked across the table. Fasha's wrist was wrapped. He had registered it on the way in and had not commented. It was bound in the strip of dark cloth she used for sparring wraps, but it was wrapped tighter than a sparring wrap, in the way she wrapped a thing she was hiding from the council. He had not seen her wrap it. She had wrapped it before he came in. "Mama hurt," Kakarot said. He had not asked the second time. He was confirming. "Just a little," Fasha said. She did not look at Bardock. She looked at the boy. "Caught you off the beam yesterday. Wrist went funny." "Beam high," Kakarot said reproachfully. "Beam is high," Fasha agreed. "Don't climb it." "Don't," Kakarot agreed, in the tone of a man making a sincere promise he had no intention of keeping. He yawned against Bardock's chest. The morning excitement had its limit, and the limit was now. He went heavy in Bardock's arms with the alarming suddenness of a sleeping child. Bardock and Fasha sat with the sleeping boy between them, and neither of them spoke for a count. "Wrist," Bardock said finally. "It's fine, Parsa. I'll go later. Today." She held his gaze. "Today," she agreed. He nodded once and looked down at the top of Kakarot's head. The boy's hair was wild and dark and stuck up in the directions hair stuck up in when its owner had spent the night moving. Bardock laid one hand on the back of the small skull. The skull fit in his palm. It always fit in his palm, and every time he registered the fit, he registered also that it had not fit so well a month ago, that the boy was growing, that the boy would not always fit in his palm. He sat with the boy and ate one-handed, and Fasha watched him eat, and the morning held. After a while, she said, "You went to Parsa first." "Yes." "Was that wise?" She needed to know. "And me." He set the spoon down. "You will know," he said. "I came here second because the first part needed to be a report, and the second part is not a report." She waited. He did not have the second part yet. He had known he did not have it when he had crossed the clearing. He had come here anyway because the alternative was not coming here, and the alternative was not acceptable. He sat with the sleeping boy on his chest and looked at his closest friend across the small table, and he tried to find the second part in the silence between them, and he could not. "I will tell you everything," he said. "I have not yet decided what everything is. I am working on it." "All right. I needed to come here this morning. I see that." She reached across the table. She put 2 fingers on the back of his free hand and rested them there. She did not curl them around. She did not move them. She left them where they were. "Take your time," she said. He looked at the 2 fingers on his hand. "Yes," he said. She left them a count longer. She took her hand back. He finished eating. She rose and took the bowl and washed it at the small basin and set it to dry and came back to the table and stood for a count beside him and laid the back of her hand briefly against the side of his face where the scar was. Her knuckles touched the scar. Her knuckles touched it gently, the way a person touches a thing they have looked at every day for 2 years and have never before laid a hand on. She took the hand away. "Get back to work," she said. He stood with Kakarot still asleep in his arms and crossed the room and laid the boy in his small cot by the wall and stood for a count watching him. Kakarot's tail had unwrapped from his wrist on the transfer and now lay across the cot mattress in a loose curl. Bardock laid one fingertip on the curl and the tail twitched in its sleep and curled around the finger. He freed the finger. He went out into the colony's morning. The Heater vessel was a long-form transport with a body the color of dull copper and a profile that was sleeker than its function required. It was parked in deep space, 6 jumps from any commerce lane, in a sector Frieza's intelligence had no reason to sweep. The deck plating was turquoise on the family deck because Elec had ordered it turquoise. The family dined together on the family deck because Elec also ordered that, and what Elec ordered in the matter of family discipline happened. The table was long and low and set for 4. 3 were sitting. The 4th chair was occupied by an empty plate and a glass. Macki was eating with the unhurried pleasure of a person who had no immediate concerns. She had her boots off and 1 foot up on the seat of her chair and her elbow on the table in a posture Elec had told her many times was beneath the family standard. Elec was not telling her this morning. Elec was watching the wall console at the head of the table where a small turquoise icon was pulsing. The icon resolved into a face. Cooler did not waste time on greeting. Cooler never wasted time on anything. The face on the console was first form, pale and violet. The family resemblance to his brother present in the bones but absent in every gesture. Where Frieza's face would have tilted, Cooler's was level. Where Frieza would have smiled, Cooler did not. He looked at Elec and he spoke. "The transaction," Cooler said. "My lord. Confirm exclusivity. Confirmed. Confirm undamaged delivery. Confirmed. Confirm coordinates and timeline." Soon, Elec said smoothly. "Final inventory within the standard window. The asset is intact. You can deploy your agents to verify the asset's coordinates, and once it is done, you may release the agreed amount. Define intact." Elec's smile arrived without disturbing any other part of his face. "The colony is operational, my lord. Population stable. Leadership intact. Civilian element preserved. The asset has not been degraded by external action since the squadron engagement, and the squadron's loss has, if anything, hardened them into a more valuable acquisition." "A more valuable acquisition," Cooler repeated. "Yes, my lord, because they killed my officer." Elec's smile held. "Because they survived your officer," he said. "The market values survivors, my lord. Trophies are priced by their record." Cooler considered him for a count. "Trophies," Cooler said. "Yes, my lord. That is the framing. That is the framing." Cooler did not nod. Cooler's face did not move. His expression was a thing that had been set in place a long time ago, and did not require adjustment for new information. "I will use them in front of my brother," Cooler said. His voice did not rise. "I will display them at the family summit. I will torture the refugees publicly. I will demonstrate that what my brother has been unable to find for years was found, purchased, and delivered by me in a single quarter. That is the use. Do you understand the use?" "I understand the use." "Then you understand that the use requires intact subjects. Damaged subjects communicate nothing. Damaged subjects are evidence of struggle. I do not require evidence of struggle. I require evidence of delivery. Yes, my lord. Exclusivity stands. Exclusivity stands. You will not be selling to my brother. You will not be selling to a third party. You will not be hedging the contract with a backup buyer in case I am dissatisfied. I would not hedge a contract with you, my lord." "I have no idea whether that is true," Cooler said. "I have priced the contract assuming it is not." Elec inclined his head a fraction. "That is the family standard, my lord." "Final inventory," Cooler said. "Verify. Confirm coordinates. We close." "Yes, my lord." The console blanked. Elec held the smile for a count after the blank. He let it ease off his face the way a man eases a glass back onto a table. He turned his head and looked across the family table, at the empty 4th chair, and at the empty plate and the empty glass. "Where is he?" Elec said. Macki spoke without looking up from her plate. Training deck. Get him. He won't come. Macki. Macki sighed and put the foot down off the chair and pushed back from the table and went. Oil, who had not spoken, finished his plate and set the utensils across it, in the precise alignment he always set them in, and looked at Elec. Trophies, Oil said. Yes. Elec almost smiled. He turned back to his own plate and did not eat. The door at the back of the family deck opened and Macki came back through it, alone. She crossed the deck to her seat and dropped back into it and put her foot back up on the chair. He's not coming, she said. Did you tell him? I told him. And he's not coming. Elec set his hands flat on the table. Macki. He says he wants the rematch, Macki said. He says he is going to have the rematch. He says the deal is your business, and the rematch is his business, and they are separate businesses. He says, these are his words, brother. I am quoting. He says the monkey marked him, and he is going to mark the monkey. And if you want to discuss it, you can come to the training deck and discuss it. Elec absorbed this for account. The product, he said quietly, is undamaged. Yes, Cooler has paid for undamaged product. Yes, if Gas takes his rematch, the product is not undamaged. Correct. And Cooler will not pay for damaged product. Correct. Macki picked up a piece of fruit from the platter at the center of the table and bit into it. So go and talk to him, she said. He will not listen. Then it doesn't matter who goes. Elec laid his hands flat on the table for account. The turquoise of the deck plating reflected up into his cuffs. His face did not move. I will handle it, he said.
Sure.
He stood. He did not handle it. He went to the training deck. He spoke to Gas. He spoke calmly and at length, and he priced the rematch in 3 different ways. And he offered Gas a private engagement at a later date once the asset had been transferred. And he offered Gas an alternative target in a different sector entirely. And he offered Gas an apology, which was a thing Elec had not offered another living person in years. Gas did not look at him. Gas was running combat forms against a striking column in the center of the training deck, and the column was made of a metal that did not yield to ordinary impact, and the column was yielding. Each strike landed on the same coordinate. The coordinate was developing a dent. The dent was deepening with each strike. You are damaging the product, Elec said very quietly from the doorway. The strikes did not pause. I am training, Gas said. He did not look around. Training does not damage product. Training prepares for engagement. The engagement is not authorized. The engagement is mine. Gas, brother, Gas said. He stopped the strike pattern. He did not turn. He spoke at the column. I have not asked you for anything in 5 years. I am not asking now. I am informing. Elec stood in the doorway for account. He left. He returned to the family deck and sat back down across from Oil and Macki, and he did not speak for a long time. Macki was the one who finally said it. Brother. Yes, if he goes. Yes, the deal. Elec did not look at her. He looked at the empty plate and the empty glass at the 4th chair. If he goes, he said, the deal becomes a different deal. We will price the difference. We will adjust the framing for Cooler. We will absorb the damage as a value-added feature of the acquisition. Cooler will not buy that. Cooler will buy what we sell him, because the alternative is admitting in front of his brother that he was outbid by his own contractors. Cooler is a cold family lord. He does not admit. He pays. Macki considered this. She bit another piece off the fruit. All right, she said. She did not sound convinced. Elec did not require her to sound convinced. Cress had not slept. She had said she would have a preliminary brief by midday and a full picture by tonight if the intercepts had anything. And the intercepts had had something. The intercepts had had more than something. The intercepts had had, once she had known what to look for, a thread that ran back nearly a decade through carrier wave fragments she had filed and never been able to place, transactions she had decoded the surface of and never been able to attribute, signal patterns in 3 different sectors that had matched no faction she had on file. They had matched no faction because the faction had not, until this morning, had a name. Now the faction had a name. She sat at her console at the comms bay, with the slate Bardock had left her at the council. And the slate was nearly full, and the blanket she kept on her chair was around her shoulders, and the cold mug at her workstation had been replaced twice. The morning was on outside the bay window. She had not registered the morning. She compiled. The Heeter family was an intelligence cartel operating across an estimated 12 sectors, with brokerage nodes in a minimum of 4, and a vessel-based mobile headquarters that had been tracked, by reconstruction from her own filed fragments, to within roughly half a parsec of standard commerce lanes for at least the last 8 years. The family had 4 members of record. The head was Elec. The field operatives were Macki and Oil. The combat asset was Gas. The The combat asset was the part that had taken her the longest to confirm because the combat asset did not appear in commercial traffic. Gas appeared in only one register of intercept, which was the high-priority direct engagement frequency the Heeters used for their own internal coordination. And the high-priority frequency was encrypted at a depth Cress could not break in one night. What she could do was correlate. She had correlated the high-priority bursts against known combat events in the sectors the Heeters were known to operate in, and she had found a pattern. The pattern was that wherever the Heeters had a contract that did not resolve cleanly, a high-priority burst preceded the contract's resolution by between 3 hours and 4 days, and the resolution, when it came, was the death of the obstacle. The obstacle was always a single individual, always. Gas was the family's cleanup. Gas was the family's deterrent. Gas was the family's reason for being unkillable, because anyone who tried to kill them had to first survive a private engagement with a combat asset the Heeters had specifically not advertised in their commercial product line. Bardock had survived a private engagement with him. Bardock had survived it 5 years ago. Bardock was the only known surviving target of a high-priority Heeter resolution event in 12 sectors in years. Cress sat with that for a count. She wrote it on the slate. She ran the next correlation. The Heeters' grudge against Frieza, which Bardock had overheard in Fragment 5 years ago, had to have a basis. She ran her own filed intercepts against Frieza Force chatter from the same period, and she found on the third pass a pattern she had filed without context, a trade dispute, a favored supplier, a Heeter-aligned smuggling lane that Frieza's enforcement had shut down in the year before Cereal. The lane had been worth, by her reconstruction, more than the GDP of 3 minor planets. The shutdown had cost the Heeters the equivalent of a generational position in 2 sectors. The shutdown had been ordered personally. The order had been signed. Cress did not normally permit herself professional admiration for an antagonist. She permitted it now, in a small way, for the patients. The Heeters had been pricing their revenge for years. She wrote that on the slate too. She compiled the rest. The Heeters' mobile headquarters. The Heeters' standard contract structure. The Heeters' known clients. A partial list, brokered through enough intermediaries that any individual client would have been deniable. Cooler was on the partial list. So was a minor cold faction lord she had filed under a different name. So were 3 Frieza Force supply officers Cress had been watching for unrelated reasons for 2 years. The Heeters were embedded in the empire they hated. They were embedded in it the way a parasite is embedded in a host, which was not to say with love. She closed the slate. She sat for a count. She rose and put the cold mug back on the warmer for the 3rd time and crossed the comms bay and went out into the morning. Bardock was at the eastern perimeter with Borgos when she found him. They were examining a sensor pylon. Borgos thought was reading a fraction too low, and Bardock was holding the test plate while Borgos worked the calibration screw with the careful precision Borgos used on every piece of equipment in the colony. Cress stopped a few meters off and waited. Borgos finished. He took the test plate back. He nodded at Bardock once and at Cress once, and he went to the next pylon. Bardock turned. "Brief," he said. "Brief." She gave it to him standing. She did not bring the slate. She had memorized it on the walk. She gave him the intelligence cartel, the 12 sectors, the vessel-based headquarters, the 4 members. She gave him Gas's cleanup function, and the pattern of high-priority resolutions, and the fact that Bardock was the only known survivor of one. She gave him the Frieza trade dispute and the shutdown lane and the order signed personally and the patience of 5 years of pricing. She stopped. He absorbed it. "The clients," he said. "Cooler is on the partial list." He did not nod. He did not need to. "How partial?" "Brokered through enough intermediaries to be deniable for any single transaction. I cannot prove the family currently has an active contract with Cooler. I can prove the family has had contracts with him before. The Heeters do not love Cooler. The Heeters do not love Frieza. The Heeters love capital, and they are using the Cold family's internal rivalry as a margin multiplier. We are the multiplier." He stood with that. The eastern perimeter was quiet. The aurora had been gone for hours. The sky was the high pale color it got at mid-morning in the colony's autumn months, and the wind was off the ridge. "Gas," he said. "Unsure, but Gas is coming. The pattern says he will not wait for the family's timeline. How long? I can't say." He nodded once. "Tora needs the brief," he said. "Vegeta needs the brief. The full council at midday. Civilian shelters at the eastern fold from tonight. Borgos's structural prep starts now. Already moving." "Good. How much do they have?" he said. "I will not know until I have broken the high priority frequency. I will not break it before gas arrives. I am telling you now because you should be operating on the assumption that anything we have done in this colony that has produced a measurable signature, the gravity facility, the perimeter grid, the Uzaru program, the council structure, the family configurations, they have some version of it. They may not have the texture. They have the shape. Understood. And Bardock, yes. If they have the shape, they have the shape of you. He stood with that. He did not respond immediately. He looked at the eastern ridge, and the wind moved his hair, and the scar on his face was on the side that was turned to her, and she did not look away from it. Then I will be ready, he said. Yes. She turned to go. He stood at the eastern perimeter for a count after she had gone. He looked at his own hands. They looked like his hands. The family shelter. Evening. The cook fire was down to coals, and the inside of the shelter was warm and small, and lit by the slow orange of the embers, and by the single oil lamp Fasha kept on the shelf above the table. Kakarot was on the floor between Bardock's feet, with his small back braced against Bardock's shin, and his palms held up in the air at the careful distance he had decided was the correct distance for the exercise, and the warmth between his palms was steadier than it had been in the morning. He had been working on it all day. Bardock watched him. Fasha was across the table with a cup of something hot in her hands, and her sparring wrap unwound on the table beside her cup. Parsa had checked the wrist at midday and had pronounced it a strain, and had given her a salve, and had told her to stop catching small Saiyans off roof beams. Fasha had said she would stop catching small Saiyans off roof beams when the small Saiyans stopped climbing roof beams. Parsa had not argued the point. Kakarot held the warmth. He held it for a count. He held it for another count. He held it longer than he had ever held it. He looked up at Bardock with an expression of small, pure satisfaction. Look, he said, I see it. Steady. It's steady. The warmth pulsed once with his pulse. He held it through the pulse. He held it. Then his concentration broke from sheer pleasure at his own success, and the warmth scattered, and his hands dropped, and he tipped his head back against Bardock's shin and laughed. Good, he said. Very good, Bardock said. Kakarot scrambled up. He climbed Bardock's leg and arm with the efficient brutality of a small Saiyan, and arrived in his lap and turned and faced Fasha across the table. Mama, he said. See? Fasha was holding her cup. She did not lower the cup. She did not move at all for a count. Her eyes were on the boy, and the boy did not register her stillness because the boy did not register stillness, ever. He was waiting for her to confirm she had seen. Did you see, Mama? He said again, more insistent. I saw, she said. Her voice was steady. The cup in her hands was not. She set it down on the table. She set it down carefully so that nothing in her hands would betray itself. The cup made the small, clean sound a cup makes when it is set down by a hand that is being deliberate about not letting it shake. Kakarot beamed at her. He had received the confirmation. He turned back to the opened floor and slid down off Bardock's lap and went to do the exercise again, because the exercise had worked and the exercise was now the only thing in the world. Bardock did not move. He did not look at Fasha immediately. He gave her the count she needed. He gave her 2 counts. He gave her 3. He looked at her. She was looking at the table. Bardock, she said. Yes. She stopped. She picked up the cup and put it down again without drinking. I don't want to take her place, she said quietly. I'm not her. I won't be her. I have never been her, and I won't pretend. I know. He is small. He doesn't. She searched for the word. He doesn't know what the word means. He has heard the other children. He has been hearing the other children for months. He picked it up. He uses it because the other children use it, and because I am the person he. She stopped again. Because I am the person he comes to. She looked up at him. Her face was not composed. He had seen Fasha's face in many configurations across the months they had been on this world, and the configuration he was looking at now he had not seen before. It was not embarrassment, although there was some of that. It was not shame. It was the configuration of a Saiyan who had been holding a thing for a long time, and had been planning to hold it for longer, and had just been required, by a 3-year-old with steady palms, to put the thing down on a table where another person could see it. He set his hands flat on the table the way he had set them on the council table in the morning. I want to say this carefully, he said. Will you let me? Yes. Gine is the mother who carried him. She named him. She died for him. I will not let any version of him forget her, and I have not let any version of him forget her, and I will not. I know that. You are the mother who raised him. She did not answer. 3 years and a half, he said, in the cradle on the transport, on the rock at New Sadala, in the dust on the move, in this shelter. You have been the one he reaches for when he is hurt. You have been the one whose name was his first word. You have been the one who taught him to sit still. You have been the one who taught him not to bite. You have been the one he wakes for and the one he sleeps near. I have been the one who stands at the perimeter. You have been the one who fed him. He paused. I have not thanked you for this, he said. I have not thanked you properly for it. I am thanking you now. She was looking at her hands. He has every right to call you whatever he calls you, Bardock said. He is calling you what you have been to him. I will not interfere with that, and I am asking you not to either. A small breath caught in her chest. He saw it catch. He did not look away. She did not look up. She kept her eyes on her own hands, on the table for a long count, and then she moved one of the hands, just one, and laid it palm down across the small space between them. She did not extend it the full distance. She laid it where she could reach without committing. He reached. He laid his hand over hers. He did not curl his fingers. He laid the palm flat. The two hands lay there, his over hers, on the worn wood of the family table, with the cup of cooling drink beside them, and the lamp making a small steady light on the shelf above. Neither of them spoke. Kakarot, on the floor, had achieved another pulse of steady warmth, and was looking up to confirm again that the world had registered his achievement. He looked at Bardock's face, and at Fasha's face, and at the two hands on the table. His own small face composed itself into the expression of a 3-year-old who had noticed something and was deciding what to do with it. He decided to do nothing. He went back to his palms. The shelter held. After a long count, Bardock turned his hand and let his fingers close briefly around hers. The pressure was small. The pressure was specific. He held her hand for the duration of one of his breaths, and then he let it go, and she did not pull it away. She left her hand where it was, palm down on the wood, the warmth of his still on her skin. Fasha, he said. She looked up. He did not have a sentence to follow her name. He had not planned past her name. He had brought her here this morning, and had not had the second part of what he came to say, and the second part had taken all day to find, and the part he had found, in the end, was simply her name. She held his gaze. Bardock, she said. That was all of it. The shelter held. Kakarot's palms held a steady warmth for the longest count of his small life, and he laughed at the success of it, and the laugh broke the silence, and the silence reset around the laugh, and the moment settled into the shape it was going to keep. After a while, Fasha drew her hand back to her cup. She picked the cup up and drank from it, and the cup did not shake. Bardock looked down at his own hand. He set it back on the table. The lamp burned on the shelf. Cooler's vessel did not look like Frieza's. Frieza's flagship was a thing of purple metal and black glass and indirect lighting that fell across the throne in carefully measured angles, every surface arranged for the optics of audience. Cooler's command vessel was the same approximate displacement and the same approximate combat profile, and was, on every other axis, the opposite of his brother's. The metal was unpolished. The lighting was overhead and flat. There was no throne. There was a command chair, lower than the consoles around it, positioned so that the man in it had to look up at his officers rather than down. A deliberate inversion that Cooler had ordered on his first day of command and had never explained. The chair was occupied. Cooler sat with his hands folded in his lap and one ankle crossed over the other knee, and his attention on the wall display ahead of him, which was running the operational footage from the squadrons. Engagement at New Sadala. The footage was 3 minutes old in the loop. He had been watching the loop since the engagement had been recovered from the wreck of Nees's Scouter, which had arrived in his vessel's holding bay 6 hours ago aboard the courier ship that had retrieved it. Salza stood at parade rest 2 meters in front of the chair. He had been standing there for 40 minutes. His armor was intact, but his left arm was in a partial brace, and his face was bandaged along the jaw, and the dressing was the dressing of a wound that had not been treated immediately, which was to say it was the dressing of a man who had been in transit and unable to seek proper care. He had requested an audience the moment his vessel had cleared the bay. The audience had been granted at the speed of Cooler's own scheduling, which was to say it had been granted at the moment Cooler had decided it suited him to grant it. The loop ran. It ran the squadron's landing on New Sadala. It ran the canyon engagement. It ran Salza's energy blade catching Shugesh across the shoulder as Shugesh shielded the Blutz wave emitter with his own body. It ran the first of the controlled Uzaru rising at the colony's eastern fold. It ran Nees at full bind wave output, dropping 3 Saiyans into stasis. It ran the Uzaru known by the colony as Hass closing on Nees from a flanking angle Nees had not registered until 2 seconds before the strike. It ran the strike. It ran Neese's body going still. It ran Door, already wounded, being dragged into Salza's craft. It ran Salza's vessel lifting off the canyon floor. It ran the coordinate burst Salza had transmitted to Frieza's intelligence net in the seconds before the jump. Cooler watched the coordinate burst. He had watched it 40 times in the last hour. He paused the loop on the burst. Salza, my lord, explain this to me. The transmission, my lord, yes. The transmission was contractually obligated under standard squadron engagement protocols. Any successful contact with high-value asset coordinates is transmitted to my brother's intelligence net. Yes, my lord. Under contractual obligation. Yes, my lord. Cooler did not move. His voice did not rise. Salza, my lord. The contractual obligation was issued by my brother's office for missions assigned by my brother's office. My lord, the protocols are universal across. The protocols are universal because no one has yet had a reason to make them anything else. I had a reason. I did not issue the reason in writing because I assumed my officer would understand it without my having to. My officer did not understand it. My officer transmitted the asset's coordinates to my brother's intelligence net at the moment of contact, which is to say my officer informed my brother that I had found what he could not find, and informed him by losing. Salza did not respond. There was no response that would have improved his position. The asset, Cooler said, was the strategic property of this command. The asset's value was contingent on my brother not knowing it had been located until I was ready to inform him. You located it. You lost it. You informed him. In a single engagement, you converted my leverage into his humiliation of me. My lord, I am not finished. Salza closed his mouth. Cooler unfolded his hands. He did so slowly. He set them on the arms of the chair. He did not stand. Nees is dead. I'm sorry, my lord. You were the senior officer at the engagement. Yes, my lord. You returned. He did not. Salza did not speak. Explain that to me, my lord. The Uzaru transformation cycle had begun before the squadron's positioning was fully resolved. Nees engaged the secondary cluster while Did you order him to engage the secondary cluster? The engagement was tactically called in the moment, my lord. Did you order it? No, my lord. I did not order it. Nees initiated, and you did not redirect. The bind wave was the squadron's primary anti-Ozaru asset, my lord. Nees judged that. Did you order him to break engagement and rejoin? No, my lord. Then you did not order him at all. You let him die because you were busy losing your own engagement against a low-class refugee. And when he died, you transmitted the coordinates to my brother and you ran. Is this an accurate summary of your performance, officer? Salza did not respond. Is it? Yes, my lord. But we were deployed by Lord Frieza for that particular engagement. Cooler considered him. I want to be specific, Cooler said, because you have been my officer for 8 years, and you may have grown comfortable with my register. Your performance at New Sadala cost me a squadron member, a strategic asset, and the standing of this command in the next family council. The cost of the squadron member is a recruitment problem and a training cost. The cost of the asset is a leverage problem I am presently engaged in solving through other channels. The cost of my standing in front of my brother is the cost I cannot recover. My lord, you will not redeem this. My lord, request permission to. You will not redeem this. You will not approach this command's operational territory in a forward roll until I have decided you have served whatever penance I devise for you. And I have not yet devised it because I have been occupied with the strategic recovery from your performance and have not had time to consider your personal one. I may send you to a scout mission to confirm coordinates when I receive them, but that is it. You will not engage with the monkeys. You have caused enough humiliation. My lord, with respect. With respect. Cooler's voice did not rise on the repetition. It did not need to. The flatness of it was the cut. You may not address me with respect, Cooler said. Respect is a thing you forfeit by your performance. You may address me with apology. You may address me with silence. You may not address me with respect until I have informed you that the right is restored. My lord. Better. Salza stood at parade rest with his face the color of a man who had received a blow to a place that had not previously been hit. Now, Cooler said, explain to me why you requested this audience. My lord, I requested the audience to request reassignment to the Saiyan engagement. I have already addressed that. Yes, my lord. Then we are finished. Salza did not move. The standing down would be his own. Cooler did not dismiss officers. Cooler concluded conversations, and the officer withdrew when he understood the conversation had concluded. Salza understood. He inclined his head a precise 5 degrees, and turned and walked the length of the command deck, and went out through the bulkhead at the far end. The door closed behind him with the soft sound deck doors made on Cooler's vessel, which had been engineered to close softly because Cooler had once, 10 years ago, ordered every door on the ship recalibrated for quiet operation, and the order had not been rescinded. Cooler watched him go. He did not turn back to the loop immediately. He sat in the command chair with his ankle crossed on his knee, and he considered the door Salza had gone through. And he considered, in the careful, unhurried way he considered most things, the operational shape of the next move. His brother owed him a squadron. His brother owed him a squadron because his brother's contractual protocols had been triggered by the engagement, and the engagement had been Cooler's, and the protocols had cost Cooler the asset's exclusivity. His brother owed him the loaned use of an asset of comparable strategic weight, and his brother kept exactly one such asset, and the asset was not currently deployed. He keyed the console at his right hand. Comms, my lord. Open a courier line to my brother's office. Standard family courtesy, no urgency markers. Inform the receiving officer that I will be requesting the temporary loan of the Ginyu Force for a special operations engagement. I do not require my brother's personal authorization. I require only the standard inter-command release. Frame it as a training exchange. Freeze release officer will approve. Yes, my lord. One additional instruction, my lord. The Ginyu Force will deploy without operational briefing on the target. The force's captain will receive a sealed engagement packet to be opened only at the deployment coordinate. The packet will contain the engagement profile and the success criteria. The captain will not be informed of the target's identity, the target's location, or the target's strategic value to this command prior to deployment. Understood, my lord. The force is also not to be informed by any third party. If it transpires that any officer of this command has communicated the target's identity to the force prior to deployment, that officer will be presented to me for adjudication of the breach. Understood, my lord. Close the line. Yes, my lord. The console blanked. Cooler returned his attention to the loop. He played the coordinate burst once more. He thought, with the small, precise interior satisfaction he permitted himself only in the privacy of his own command chair, that his brother would never know how much pleasure it gave him to use his brother's own elite asset against an asset his brother did not know he was hunting. He closed the loop. Salza did not go to his quarters. He went to the corridor outside the command deck and stood for a count against the bulkhead with his good shoulder pressed to the metal and his eyes closed, and the corridor was empty because Cooler's vessel was always nearly empty in the corridors outside operational hours, and he stood with the close of the conversation echoing in his head and the precise 5-degree incline of his own neck still in the muscle of it. He opened his eyes. He went to Door. Door was in the medical bay on the lower deck. He was upright on a bed, and the bed was reinforced because Door's mass required reinforcement, and the bed was the only piece of equipment in the bay he had not damaged in the 6 hours since he had been carried aboard. His side was bandaged. His left thigh was bandaged. His face was bandaged. The bandages were green-tinged where the colony's wound paste had not yet been fully washed out by the vessel's medics, which spoke poorly of the vessel's medics and well of the colonies. Door was eating from a bowl with his good hand, and the bowl was nearly empty. Salza. Door. Door registered the brace on his arm, and the bandage on his jaw and the color of his face, and did not ask. He held out the bowl. Finish it. Salza took the bowl. He ate from it standing because the bay's chairs were not engineered for squadron officers in armor. He told Door what Cooler had said. He told him in the brief register 2 squadron officers used with each other when they were trading operational summaries, stripped of inflection, stripped of editorializing, the facts in order. Door listened. When Salza had finished, he set the bowl down on the bed frame. And I will not redeem this. He said that. In those words, Door considered. He had been on the squadron longer than Salza. He had been on the squadron longer than anyone alive, because Door did not die of things that killed squadron officers, and Door had a memory for the precedents. Lord Cooler, Door said carefully, has revoked privileges before. Yes. He has revoked them with conditions. Yes. He told you he had not yet devised your penance. Yes. Then there will be a penance. The penance will be assigned. You will perform it. The privileges will be restored. The privileges may not be restored. The privileges will be restored, Door said. Because Lord Cooler does not lose officers. He shapes them. He shaped you for years. He will not have shaped you for years and then discarded you for one engagement. He will assign penance. You will perform it. You will redeem. Salza looked at the bowl. Or, Dor said, in the same careful register, you will redeem before the penance is assigned. Salza did not look up. That would, Dor said, be a breach of order. Yes, it would be a breach for which there is no recovery if you fail. Yes, and limited recovery if you succeed. Yes, Dor considered. If you succeed, he said, Lord Cooler will be required to either acknowledge that an officer in disgrace recovered the engagement his squadron lost, or to extend the disgrace to cover the unauthorized action. He will choose one. I do not know which. Acknowledge, Salza said. Why? Because the alternative is to admit publicly that a disgraced officer succeeded where his squadron failed. That admission costs him more than the acknowledgement does. He will acknowledge. That assumes you succeed. Yes, and if you fail, I will not return. Dor looked at him. He looked at him for a long count. Salza, Dor said. Yes, I am still wounded. I know. I am wounded because a Saiyan broke my collarbone and put me down for 2 days at a level of output I have not been put down at since my 3rd year on the squadron. The Saiyan who broke my collarbone did so without scaling above his baseline. I have considered the engagement. I am not certain Lord Cooler is correct that the asset can be recovered before the Ginyu Force arrives. The Ginyu Force is 1 to 2 weeks from deployment, Salza said. Cooler has just opened the request line. The Ginyu Force will not move for at least 72 hours, and possibly longer if Frieza's release officer queries the framing. We have a window. Lord Cooler will share coordinates with me to confirm the colony's location only. I am informing you that I am going. If you wish to come, the vessel I will be requisitioning has space for 2. If you do not, I will go alone. Dor considered. The squadron is 1 officer short. Yes. If we are also lost, the squadron is 3 officers short. Yes. Lord Cooler will not have a squadron. He will have a uniform. Yes. Dor picked up the empty bowl. He turned it in his hands. I will come, he said. I did not ask. You did not need to. Salza let out a breath. He had not known he was holding it. He set the bowl down on the bed frame. 6 hours, he said. Resupply at the auxiliary bay. The vessel will be logged out under the cover of a medical evacuation transfer. You are well enough to walk. I am well enough to walk. Then walk. Salza turned to go. Salza. He stopped. If we are doing this, Dor said, we go for the leadership. We do not go for the colony. The leadership will be exposed if we draw them out. We engage them before the Ginyu Force is in system. Anything less is not redemption. Anything less is theater. For knees. For knees. Salza went. Dor sat on the reinforced bed in the medical bay and looked at the empty bowl in his hand and turned it once more and set it down. He had been on the squadron longer than anyone alive. He had not, in any of those years, gone against an order from Lord Cooler. He sat with that for a count. He stood. He walked. Cress detected the approach at the 11th hour of the 3rd day. She had been sleeping in the comms bay, which was to say she had been folded sideways in her work chair, with the blanket over her shoulders, and her cheek on the back of her own hand, and a small, audible breath drawing through her teeth, and the perimeter alert woke her with the small, sharp sound it made when the sensor grid resolved a contact into the engagement priority register. She came up at the console, and her hands were moving before her mind had fully cleared. The contact was not a Heeter signature. That was the first thing she registered. The signature was older, larger, slower, and it had the operational profile of a Cooler faction craft. The configuration was squadron issue. The drive emissions were squadron tuned. The approach vector was not a deployment vector. It was an insertion vector. She ran the secondary correlation. The signature matched 2 known squadron vessels, Salza's, Dor's. She keyed the alert before she had finished cross-checking. Bardock, Tora, Vegeta, Council Channel, Squadron Contact at the Southern Fold, 2 craft, Salza and Dor, insertion vector. Estimated touchdown 9 minutes. The channel woke. Bardock's voice came on first. Position. Southern Fold, 3 kilometers off the inner perimeter. They came in low under the EM field. I caught them on the ground sweep. Numbers. 2 craft, 2 officers, no support. Confirmed 2. Confirmed 2. Hold. She held. The channel held for a count of 3. Vegeta came on. Bardock. Yes. I take disengagement. Account. Agreed, Bardock said. Nappa with me, Vegeta said. Tora at the right flank. Fasha Eastern, limited duty. Haas on civilian shelter protection. Confirmed. Borgos at the structural reserve. Confirmed. Let's move. The channel closed. Cress sat for a half-second after the close, with her hand on the console and her breath running short, and she let the half-second be the half-second, and then she went back to work, because the work was the only thing that mattered now, and because she had been doing the work with the cold operational clarity that was her version of courage, that the colony's survival was the sum of the small decisions made by the people who did the work. She ran the secondary sweep. The secondary sweep was clean. She ran the tertiary sweep against the heater signatures she had filed yesterday. The tertiary sweep was also clean. She watched the squadron contact for a count. The contact held its vector. She did not relax. She would not relax until the engagement was closed. But the tertiary sweep was clean, and the heaters were not on the vector. And for the next 9 minutes, the colony was facing a 2-officer squadron insertion and not a 4-heater coordinated strike, and she would take what the universe gave her when the universe gave it. The contact closed to 2 kilometers. She watched. The central clearing was the wide, flat pan of compressed earth at the convergence of the colony's 3 main paths, where the longhouse and the medical bay and the kitchen shelter looked onto an open space large enough that the colony had once, in the second year, held a wedding in it. It was not a wedding ground tonight. It was a killing ground. Vegeta stood at the eastern edge of the pan with his arms crossed. He stood with his feet planted at the shoulder width he always planted them at, and his hair caught the last of the day's light, and the 9-year-old face under the hair was the face of an 9-year-old who had been training, every day, for a moment that he had decided, when he had landed on this world, that he would be the one to take. Nappa stood 3 paces behind him and to the right. The veteran had been months in recovery from the vacuum blast pod hatch injury, and had been 6 months back to full duty after that, and the body that stood at parade rest in the clearing tonight was the body that had carried the prince across 2 systems, and that was not going to be carried in itself for a long time yet. His armor was the same armor he had been wearing on Frieza's flagship the day they had taken the breakout pods. He had refused, on arrival, to replace it. The armor had been repaired by Borgos twice. Borgos had told him both times that the armor was older than half the warriors in the colony. Nappa had said that was the point. Tora was at the right flank. Fasha was at the eastern, the bandaged wrist out of the wrap and into a brace Parsa had fitted her with that afternoon. She had argued for full duty. Parsa had argued back. The compromise had been the brace and a position on the perimeter rather than in the central engagement, and Fasha had accepted the compromise because the alternative was sitting in the family shelter, and the family shelter was not, tonight, where she could be. Haas was at the western with the civilian shelters at his back. Borgos was behind the longhouse with the structural reserve, which was to say he was behind the longhouse with the things that fell when the longhouse fell, and his hands were on the wall. Bardock was on the rise above the central clearing, where he could see the whole pan and the eastern ridge and the southern fold and the western approach all at once. He had a hand on the haft of nothing. He had laid no weapon out for himself tonight. He had not intended to engage. He had agreed to Vegeta's distribution. He stood on the rise and watched, and the scar on his face was on the side toward the southern fold. The craft came in low. They came over the southern fold at altitude, a small vessels in the squadron's matte gray, and it touched down at the southern edge of the central clearing. The hatch opened. Salza and Dor came out. They walked to the center of the pan and stopped. Salza spoke first. He spoke to the rise. He did not address Vegeta. He did not address Nappa. He addressed Bardock, because Bardock was the engagement he had come for, and the engagement he had come for was not the engagement he was going to get. Bardock, Salza called. We have unfinished business. Vegeta uncrossed his arms. He stepped forward into the pan, and the step was the small, precise step of a prince registering that an officer of an opposing command had failed to acknowledge the presence of royalty, and the failure was not, in his view, going to stand. The business, Vegeta said, has been transferred. Salza looked at him. He had not, until that moment, registered the prince. Salza's eyes narrowed a fraction. I do not engage children, he said. You do not engage children because you cannot defeat them, Vegeta said. His voice was pleasant in the way Frieza's was pleasant, which was to say it was pleasant in the way that promised the opposite. Bardock has had an upgrade. I am the upgrade. You will engage me, officer, or you will engage the rear of his command and find his palm on your throat before you reach the rise. Salza considered. He looked back at Vegeta. The prince of all Saiyans, Vegeta said. So I have heard. Then engage. Salza moved. The fight that followed was the fight Vegeta had been hungry for ever since he landed on second Sadala. It was not a clean fight. Salza was not a clean fighter. Salza was a cold faction elite who had been trained for years inside the armored squadron, and had been trained, in the last 6 weeks, with an additional brutality Cooler had applied personally to the body of the officer who had cost him a squadron member. The opening was Salza's. He came in fast at a high angle, the energy blade materializing along his right forearm before his feet had left the ground, and he closed the distance to Vegeta in the time a man might take to draw a breath. Vegeta did not move backward. He moved sideways and forward into the angle in a step that took him under the energy blade and brought his left shoulder into Salza's ribs at the precise moment Salza's strike committed to a target that was no longer there. The shoulder drove Salza off his line. Salza adjusted in the air. He pivoted on his hip, and the energy blade swept down toward the back of Vegeta's neck. Vegeta was no longer there either. He had pushed off the strike against the ribs and ascended in a tight rising spiral that took him 3 meters above Salza's level before Salza had completed the downstroke, and from 3 meters above, he fired a tight cone ki blast straight down through the air the energy blade was passing through. The blast was the size of a fist, and it caught Salza at the crown of the head as Salza's blade was still moving. Salza absorbed it. His head snapped sideways. He recovered in air and pushed off nothing and rose to Vegeta's level, and the fight moved into the sky. Salza had the reach. Vegeta had the speed. Salza had the experience. Vegeta had the gravity chamber training. Salza had the energy blade, which was a continuous threat that meant Vegeta could not afford to be inside its arc for any sustained engagement. Vegeta had Vegeta's particular precision, which was the precision of a small body that had been trained from infancy to read a strike a half second before its commit, and to be elsewhere when the strike arrived. They fell out of the sky together at the end of the first long exchange. They came down into the pan, and the impact threw dust outward in a hard ring, and they were already striking before the dust had settled, and the strikes were short and brutal, and at a register the audience of the colony had not seen Vegeta fight at before. Salza connected. He landed a clean strike on Vegeta's left collarbone with the haft of the energy blade, not the blade itself, the haft, because the blade had been turned at the last moment by Vegeta's guard, and the impact rocked Vegeta sideways 3 steps, and the collarbone made the small dry sound a collarbone makes when it has not quite broken but has been instructed. Vegeta did not stop. He absorbed the strike. He turned with the impact rather than against it. The turn took him into Salza's blind side, and the right hand came up, and the right hand was full of ki, and the right hand drove the ki straight into Salza's exposed ribs at point blank. Salza came off the ground. He came off the ground and went 5 meters backward across the pan and landed on his back and was up again before he had finished landing, the energy blade still on his right forearm, the left side of his armor cracked through the breastplate where Vegeta's strike had taken him. He looked at Vegeta. He had stopped speaking entirely. The fight resumed at a higher tier. Nappa and Dore had moved off at the start of Vegeta's engagement. Because Dore had moved off at the start of Vegeta's engagement, and Nappa had moved off because Nappa's assigned function tonight was Dore, and Nappa was a soldier who held his assignment. They fought at the southern edge of the pan. The fight was the fight 2 heavy combatants have when they have known each other's footwork by reputation for years and are meeting it for the first time. Dore was the larger. Dore was wounded. The wound flared every time Dore took a heavy strike on the right side, and Nappa, who had been a royal guard for 30 years before he had been anything else, registered the flare inside the first exchange and worked the right side from then on. The fight was sustained. It was not flashy. It was not a prince-on-prince showcase. It was the workmanlike fight of 2 career soldiers, neither of whom had ever in his life prioritized form over result, and the result was that Dore took, across the first 3 minutes of the engagement, a methodical sequence of strikes to the right ribs and the right hip and the right thigh that converted his wound from an injury into a disability. He answered. He answered hard. He landed strikes on Nappa that another body might not have absorbed. Nappa absorbed them because Nappa was Nappa, and Nappa had been absorbing strikes since before Vegeta had been born, and Nappa had not yet found, in his career, a strike from a squadron tier officer that he had not been able to absorb at least once. The closing was clean. Nappa drove Dore backward across the southern edge of the pan into the rise at the base of the western ridge, and pinned him to the rise with a knee in the right thigh and a forearm across the throat, and Dor, whose right leg had given out beneath him, could not push off the rise, and could not throw the knee, and could not, by then, do very much of anything. Nappa did not kill him. The order had been to engage and to close. The order had not been to execute. Nappa pinned him and held him and looked across the pan at Vegeta. Vegeta read the strike a half-second before Salza committed to it. He had been reading Salza's strikes a half-second before commit for the last 40 seconds of the engagement, and he had been adjusting. And Salza had been readjusting, and the two of them had been fighting in the recursive register of two combatants, each trying to outpace the other's read time. And Vegeta had been losing the recursion by small increments and gaining it back by smaller ones, and the engagement had reached the moment where one of them was going to commit to a strike the other had not yet read. Salza accessed his full cold faction output. It came on him the way cold faction output came on, which was to say it came on as a ripple of bright violet ki across his shoulders and down the energy blade, and the blade lengthened, and the blade brightened, and the air around Salza took on the slight optical distortion of a combatant operating at a tier his body had not been built to sustain for very long. Vegeta met him. He did not access an equivalent. He did not have an equivalent to access, and at the end of the exchange, Salza committed. Vegeta read. The strike was the killing strike Salza had been building toward across the entire engagement. It was the strike Salza always built toward, the angled energy blade thrust across the diagonal from upper right to lower left that came in past the guard at the throat and continued through the chest at the angle of a heart line. Vegeta had been reading it in fragments across the fight, and he had been waiting for the commit, and the commit came. He read it a half-second early. He stepped into the strike, not away, into. He closed the distance the strike required, and he closed it before the strike had reached extension, and the energy blade was at his shoulder rather than at his throat, because the strike had not yet been long enough to be at his throat, and Vegeta's right hand was already moving. The right hand took Salza in the throat. It was not a ki blast. It was a strike. The hand was open, and the strike was the heel of the palm, and the heel of the palm took Salza in the precise hollow at the base of the throat where the cold faction armor did not extend. Salza's body registered the strike a half-second before his mind did. He dropped. He went to one knee in the pan, with his right hand still extended in the unfinished thrust, and the energy blade guttering along the forearm, and his left hand at his throat. His eyes were on Vegeta's. He did not speak. He had said nothing since the engagement had begun in earnest. He looked up at the Prince of all Saiyans, who had been a child on Frieza's flagship since many years, and was now standing over him in the central clearing of a refugee colony, and he opened his mouth. "I'm sorry," he said. "Lord Cooler." He was not addressing Vegeta. Vegeta drove the heel of the palm through the throat. The strike took Salza's neck cleanly. The body folded. The energy blade went out. The squadron officer who had stood in front of Cooler's command chair 8 hours ago and had been told he would not redeem this lay on his side in the central clearing of the colony he had come to redeem himself against, and the redemption, in the end, had been the strike that closed the engagement. He did not move. He would not. Vegeta did not look down at the body. He turned. He turned slowly, on the balls of his feet, with the small, precise pivot of a combatant scanning the field, and he scanned the field. Tora at the right flank, unengaged. Fasha at the eastern, unengaged, watching him with an expression he registered and filed. Haas at the western, civilian shelters intact. Borgos behind the long house, hands on the wall. Bardock on the rise, motionless, with the scar visible. Nappa at the southern. Nappa had Dor pinned. Vegeta crossed the pan toward them. He had taken 3 steps when Dory, pinned, lifted his head and looked past Nappa's forearm at Salza's body in the center of the pan and made a sound that was not a word, and Nappa, who had been holding Dor in compliance with the engagement order rather than in compliance with any tactical necessity, registered the sound and looked at Vegeta. "Prince, release him. Prince, release him. He will go to the body. Let him." Nappa released him. Dor stood. He stood badly. The right leg would not hold his weight, and he limped on it, the wound in the right ribs gone bright with the strain, and he crossed the pan toward Salza's body with the slow, ungainly walk of a heavy combatant whose body had reached the limit of what it could do tonight. He reached Salza. He knelt beside the body. He did not check the throat. The throat was checked. He set one hand on Salza's chest plate and one hand on the ground beside the body, and he braced to lift. And lifting Salza, even for Dor, was going to require both hands and a careful repositioning of his own injured leg. And he was repositioning when Gas arrived. Gas did not announce his arrival. He did not materialize the way he had materialized on the cliff 5 years ago in Bardock's dream. He arrived on foot, walking out of the southern fold into the pan at an unhurried pace. His face was the face Bardock had seen on the cliff. It was older now. It was not, in any way that mattered, different. He passed Dor on his way into the pan. He did not break stride. He extended his right hand sideways as he walked, and a weapon formed in it, short-hafted, long-headed, a single-edged blade that resolved out of the air around his fingers in the way heater weapons resolved. And he turned the blade as he passed Dore and brought it across Dor's neck in a single horizontal stroke without breaking stride. Dor's head left his shoulders. The body knelt for a count, kneeling beside Salza's body, and then it tipped sideways and fell across Salza's chest. The two squadron officers lay in the pan together. The head rolled 3 meters off and stopped. Gas did not look at the bodies. He continued walking. He was looking at Vegeta. The blade in his hand dissolved and was replaced by a longer one, more substantial, the edge running with a faint shimmer of energy that was not the cold faction violet but a different color entirely. A color that had no name in Saiyan and that Bardock, on the rise, recognized. Vegeta registered the approach. He registered the kill. He registered the weapon. He registered the pace. He registered the fact that Gas had killed a squadron officer at point blank, without effort and without acknowledgement, and was now closing on him with the same unhurried walk. He set his guard. The guard would not be enough. He understood, with the cold operational clarity of a combatant who had just finished a tier-defining engagement and whose body was running at the lower edge of what it had been built for, that Gas had walked into the pan at a tier Vegeta did not have access to tonight. He set the guard anyway. He set it because he was Vegeta, and Vegeta did not, in his life, decline a guard. Gas closed to 10 meters. He raised the weapon. The strike committed. Bardock came off the rise. He came down out of the dusk at a speed the colony had not seen him move at, and he was across the pan before the strike had reached its midpoint, and he intercepted the weapon in the air a half-meter from Vegeta's face. His forearm met the haft. The haft snapped. The blade dissolved. The energy bled off into the dusk as a faint-colored mist. Gas stopped. He had not, in the last 5 years, encountered an opponent who could intercept that strike. He looked, for the first time since he had walked into the pan, at the face of the man who had intercepted it. He saw the scar. The two of them stood in the center of the pan, with Vegeta 2 meters behind Bardock and Salza and Dor in the dust 10 meters off, and the head 3 meters past them, and the colony's perimeter in a ring around them, and Gas's hand was still open in the position of the strike, and Bardock's forearm was still raised in the position of the intercept, and neither of them moved. "Hello," Gas said. His voice was high and almost bored. It was the voice from the cliff. Bardock did not respond. "Bardock," Vegeta said. From behind him, quietly. "Get to the medical bay." Vegeta moved. He moved without further argument because the Prince of all Saiyans had been in the engagement of his life for the last 6 minutes, and his body was telling him, in the language bodies used, that the next engagement was not his to take. He turned and crossed the pan toward the medical bay at a walk that he held to a walk by an act of pure will, and Nappa fell in beside him without being asked, and the two of them cleared the pan. Gas watched him go. He did not pursue. He did not need to. The engagement he had come for had arrived in front of him, and the engagement was the one he had been pricing for 5 years, and he would not interrupt the pricing now. He looked at Bardock. He stepped backward in the pan, slowly, and Gas stepped forward, slowly, and the two of them began to circle. The light died over the western ridge. The colony watched. The heater vessel's bridge was quiet. Elec stood at the central viewport with his hands clasped behind his back and his face composed, and the turquoise of the deck plating reflected up into the cuffs of his coat. The viewport showed the deep dark, and the deep dark showed nothing back, because the deep dark was not where the engagement was. The engagement was on the surface, 3 jumps off, and the engagement was visible only through the small console screen at Elec's right hand, which was showing the operational feed Macki had patched in from the surveillance drone the family had inserted at the colony's southern perimeter 6 hours ago. The feed showed Gas in the central clearing. Gas was walking. Elec watched him walk. He had been watching him walk for 2 minutes. The walk was not a heater vessel deck walk. It was not a family table walk. It was the walk of a combatant closing on an engagement he had decided, against orders, to take. The walk had passed 2 bodies on the way in. The walk was not, presently, slowing. Macki was at the console. She had the operational feed running through 3 filters simultaneously and was reading the signature data off Gas's combat output in real time, and the signature data was already running high, and the signature data was going to run higher. She did not say so. Oil was at the back of the bridge, in the heavy chair he occupied when the family was in operations rather than at table, with his hands flat on his knees and his face the face he wore in operations, which was the face he wore at table only with the slowness gone out of it. He was watching the feed too. He was not speaking. Elec spoke without turning from the viewport. Macki. Yes. The asset. Damaged. Degree. 2 officers of Cooler's squadron dead on the surface. Killed by the asset's own military command and by Gas in passing. The asset's own military command was the Prince. Confirmed visual ID on the Prince during the engagement. The Prince closed on Salza in a tier-comparable exchange and killed him cleanly. Gas killed Dore in passing on his way to the engagement he came for. The engagement he came for is Bardock. Yes, Bardock is on the field. Bardock is on the field. Elec held his hands at his back. He did not move. Macki. Yes. Open the channel. To Cooler. To Cooler. She opened the channel. The channel took 11 seconds to resolve, which was longer than Cooler's channels usually took, and the 11 seconds were 11 seconds of Elec standing at the viewport composing the precise sentence he was going to lead with. The composition was nearly finished by the time Cooler's face resolved on the small console. Cooler did not greet. He looked at Elec. Elec. My lord. The transaction. My lord, I am calling with an operational update that I am required by contractual courtesy to deliver to you in real time. Define real time. The asset is currently sustaining damage on the surface. Account. Cooler's face did not move. Define damage. 2 of your squadron officers, my lord, have engaged the asset's leadership without authorization from my command or yours. The engagement has resulted in the deaths of both officers. I'm not sure if that was your plan. We had only agreed for scout operation so you could confirm the coordinates as accurate and truthful. I am informing you, my lord, that the damage to your purchased product has been inflicted by your own squadron's action. The damage to the asset is presently mid-tier. Account. 2 of my squadron, Cooler said. Yes, my lord. Engaged without authorization. Yes, my lord. Cooler's face moved. It was the first time Elec had seen it move. The movement was small. The movement was at the corner of the left eye. And the movement was the small involuntary tightening of a cold faction lord registering, in real time, that an officer he had reprimanded 12 hours ago had gone rogue against the order he had issued, and the going rogue had cost him not only the officer, but the operational seal he had placed on the transaction by issuing the order. The movement passed. The face reset. Cooler considered Elec across the console. The consideration was the longest Cooler had ever held a consideration in the years of Elec's professional acquaintance with him. The consideration lasted 9 seconds. The 9 seconds were the 9 seconds in which Cooler reviewed in his own mind the operational facts as they had been presented and decided what they were worth in the present context, and decided what they would be worth in the family summit context, and decided what they would be worth in the brother context, and decided, in the way Cooler decided things, on a single course of action. Complete the transaction, he said. My lord, complete it now. I will take delivery at the agreed coordinate within the standard window. The pricing as posted holds. Yes, my lord. The channel closed. Elec stood at the viewport for a count. He looked at his own reflection in the dark glass. The turquoise of the deck reflected up into his coat. His face was composed. His hands at his back were not visible in the reflection. He turned. Macki. Yes. Are we recording the engagement? Yes. The full engagement. Full feed. All filters. Audio. Audio is up on the family's high priority frequency. Gas's combat comm is still active. Good. Open a recall to Gas, he said, on the collar frequency. He will hear it. He will not obey. I want the recall on the record. On the record for whom? For the family. For the family summit context, in the event that one becomes relevant. For myself. Open it. She opened it. Elec leaned to the console. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the precise composed pleasantness he used for clients of standing. Gas. Recall. Withdraw. Repeat. Withdraw. The transaction has been completed. Delivery is at the agreed coordinate within the standard window. Your engagement is not authorized. Withdraw. He closed the recall. He turned from the console. Lift off the surveillance drone, he said. Maintain the feed. We will watch from the dark. Macki worked the console. The drone lifted. The feed held. Elec walked the length of the bridge and stood at the viewport again, and the deep dark gave him nothing back. And on the small console at his right hand, the feed showed Gas in the central clearing, walking, with the recall not heard or not heeded or, Elec understood now, with the precise composed clarity of a man who had been outpriced inside his own family for the first time in his life, heeded and rejected. He stood at the viewport. He did not move for a long count. Brother, he said, very quietly to the dark glass. He did not address Gas. He addressed himself. The Eastern Valley was where Gas had taken Bardock. He had taken him there the way a fighter takes another fighter to a place he has chosen, by closing the distance in the central clearing and not closing it cleanly, so that Bardock had backed off and Gas had pressed, and Bardock had backed further and Gas had pressed further, and the back pressure of two combatants probing each other had carried them across the colony's outer structures and through the eastern fold and down into the wide flat bowl of the valley where the colony held its open-air training exercises in the autumn months. The bowl was flat. The bowl was clear. The bowl was the only open ground in the colony's perimeter wide enough for what Gas was about to do. He had not yet done it. He was still circling. He had been circling for 30 seconds, and Bardock had been circling with him, and neither of them had committed, and the circle was the slow opening pattern of two combatants who had once met in a way both of them remembered. The colony watched from the eastern fold. Tora was up the ridge with the rear guard, his hand on the haft of nothing, because Bardock had not laid a weapon out for himself tonight, and Tora had not laid one out for him either, and the engagement was not Tora's engagement, and Tora was holding the line because the line was his. Fasha was at the family shelter doorway. She had come back from the eastern perimeter at the sound of the engagement, leaving the central clearing, and she had come back at the speed she could come back with the wrist brace and the limited duty, and she had reached the family shelter at the moment Kakarot had begun to cry. The boy had not known why he was crying. He had known something was wrong. He had cried in the way 3.5-year-olds cried when the air in their world had changed shape, which was without a word, and with a fierce, small, wet face and small fists at his eyes, and she had picked him up, and he had buried his face in her shoulder, and she had held him at the doorway facing the eastern fold, because she was not, tonight, going to be inside a shelter with a wall between her and the engagement. She held him. She watched. Kakarot, in her arms, had stopped crying. He had stopped crying because Fasha was there, and because the air had stopped changing shape, and because the small body in her arms had decided that the change had been processed. He was looking out across the colony at the eastern fold. He could not see into the valley. The eastern fold rose up between the family shelter and the bowl. He could see the rise. He could see the dust over the rise that was beginning to lift from the floor of the bowl. He could see, faintly the colored key at the edges of the rise where the combatants had begun to bleed output into the air. His small face was set. He did not speak. Gas spoke first. The tail grew back. Bardock did not respond. "I'm going to rip it out again." Bardock did not respond. "And the scar," Gas said, "I'm going to put a new one across the first one. I have been thinking about the new one for 5 years. I have decided on the angle. I have been practicing the angle." Bardock circled. "You took something from me on Cereal that you do not understand. You will understand it tonight." "I won," Bardock said. It was the first thing he had said since the engagement had begun. Gas stopped circling for a half second. "What?" "I won," Bardock said. "On Cereal. I won. You lost. You have been pretending you didn't for 5 years. I am not pretending tonight. You. I am not pretending. I won. You lost. The fight on the cliff was the fight, and I won it. Your brother shot me off the cliff after. That was the part that hurt you, that I was off the cliff before you woke up. So you decided I had not won. You decided your brother had won for you. You have been carrying the decision for 5 years. I am not carrying it. Account." "Tonight," Bardock said, "we will not have this confusion. Tonight there will not be a brother to shoot me off a cliff. Tonight when it is over, one of us will be on the ground and the other will not." Gas resumed circling. The bored grin was on his face. "All right," he said. He committed. The opening of the fight was not the opening of the cliff fight. Gas was now older. Gas was finished. Gas was the polished version of the young man on the cliff, with 5 years of training applied to a body that had already been the family's combat asset at the time of Cereal. And the polish was visible from the first exchange. The weapons that materialized in his hand came at angles the cliff Gas could not have committed to. The inner nature corona that rose around his shoulders rose faster and held longer and shed less of itself into the air around him. The strike geometry was tighter. The recovery was faster. The pacing was the pacing of a combatant who had been waiting for this engagement long enough to have priced every line of it. Bardock was not the Bardock of the cliff either. He had been rebuilt. He had been rebuilt across the years by a regimen Tora had run on him every morning before the colony had woken. He had been rebuilt by Parsa, in increments, by the work she had done on his key channels while telling him she had done nothing. He stood in the bowl tonight at his full rebuilt baseline, and the baseline was the baseline of a combatant who had earned, by inches, the body he had on the floor. The body was not enough. He registered that inside the first 10 seconds. He registered it the way a combatant registered it, which was without ceremony. He simply noted as Gas's first 3 strikes came at him and were deflected at greater cost than his deflections should have cost, that the engagement was operating at a tier above the one his rebuilt baseline could sustain. The deflections were going to compound. The compound was going to break him. He was going to lose the engagement on the body alone if he fought it on the body alone. He did not, yet, do anything about it. He fought. He fought because the alternative was to reach for the thing in his sternum that he had been told not to reach for. And he had been told not to reach for it by the medic who knew his body better than he did. And he had said to her that he understood and did not promise, and the not promise was a thing he was still going to honor for as long as the engagement permitted him to honor it. The engagement was not going to permit him to honor it for long. He knew that too. He fought anyway. Gas's mace dissolved and became a spear, and the spear came in low, and Bardock turned his hip, and the spear went past him, and Gas pivoted the haft and brought the spear back across in a horizontal sweep that took Bardock at chest height, and Gas committed to the next strike a half second before Bardock had recovered. The next strike took him in the ribs. Not deep, not killing. A registered hit on the right side, the spear point cutting through the armor and into the muscle, and Gas drew it back as Bardock turned away from the strike. And Bardock turned away from the strike and came back at Gas with a riot javelin that Gas slipped sideways with the unhurried movement of a combatant who had read the javelin a half second before commit. Gas committed to a new weapon. The new weapon was a chain. The chain was the worst of the weapons. Bardock had not seen the chain in 5 years. He had not seen it on the cliff, because on the cliff, Gas had been a child, and the chain was the weapon of the finished combatant Gas had become. The chain extended out from Gas's right hand, and the length of it was variable, and the weight at the end of it was variable, and the pattern of attack the chain produced was the pattern of attack of a weapon that did not have to commit to a single geometry, because the chain could change angle mid-strike in ways the eye could not predict. Gas swung the chain. Bardock backed. He backed 3 steps. He backed 4. He read the chain on the second pass and registered the weight at the end, and he timed the next pass for the moment the weight committed to its low arc. And he stepped into the gap, and the chain went past his shoulder, and he drove a closed fist strike into Gas's exposed side at the moment of his own commit. The strike landed. The inner nature corona absorbed most of it. Gas adjusted in the air, and the chain shortened, and the weight came back at him from a new angle, and Bardock got his guard up, but the guard was at half extension, and the weight took him across the upper arm, and the arm went numb. He stepped back. He stepped back a long way. He put 20 meters of bowl floor between himself and Gas. He looked at his right arm, which had gone numb from the shoulder to the wrist, and the numbness was the numbness of a key channel that had been struck across its line, and Gas, on the other side of the bowl, registered the look and grinned. "The arm," Gas said. "The same one Elec shot." Bardock did not respond. "I have been thinking about the arm for 5 years," Gas said. "I have been thinking about most of you for 5 years. Look at you. Refugee. Monkey. There's nothing left of your kind but this dirt patch and these children you can't protect." He swung the chain again, idly, the weight low along the ground. "You think you're hidden here," he said. "My brother sold you. To Cooler. He's already paid. You and your colony are cattle now. He just hasn't come to collect." Bardock did not respond. "Cooler will gut your boy in front of you," Gas said. "He'll mount your woman's head on his throne." The arm came back into Bardock at that. The numbness ran off the shoulder and into the fingers, and the fingers closed, and the closed fist was the fist of a Saiyan who had heard a sentence about his woman's head. Gas registered the close of the fist. He grinned wider. "And the funniest part," Gas said, "we sold you and walked away. You'll spend the rest of your short lives running from a buyer you've never met." Bardock came at him. He closed the 20 meters at speed, and he drove a sequence of strikes at Gas that took Gas backward across the bowl floor for the first time in the engagement. And the strikes were not winning strikes, but they were the strikes of a combatant who had decided, at the level below speech, that he was going to make the next sentence Gas spoke a worse one. Gas laughed through the strikes. "Run," he said, between exchanges. "Keep running. You'll die tired." Bardock answered with a riot javelin at point blank that Gas slipped by the width of his collarbone. Gas pivoted. He pivoted out of the exchange. He pivoted at speed. The pivot was the speed of a combatant who had decided the engagement Bardock was committing to was not the engagement he was going to take, and the speed was the speed Gas had been holding in reserve, and the direction was the direction Bardock had been afraid of since the engagement had started. Gas broke contact and moved toward the family shelter. Bardock read the angle a fraction too late. He was across the bowl floor before he had finished registering the read. He was at the rise of the eastern fold before he had finished registering the cross. He was over the rise and into the colony's outer ring before he had finished registering the climb. He was moving at his full rebuilt baseline, and his full rebuilt baseline was not going to be enough, because Gas had broken contact at the moment of his own pivot and had used the half second of Bardock's late red to open a lead of 15 meters. And 15 meters at Gas's present speed was the difference between intercepting at the shelter door and intercepting at the shelter cot. The shelter was 40 meters off. Fasha was at the door. She saw Gas come over the eastern fold. She saw him close. She set the boy down behind her in the doorway, and her brace hand came up in the position of a strike she would not finish in time, because the wrist would not commit to a full strike, and because the strike, if it committed, would not stop what was coming, and she set herself in front of the boy because she had nothing else to do. Kakarot, behind her, watched. He had not made a sound since she had set him down. His small face was set. He was watching the eastern fold, and he saw, before Fasha saw, the second figure come over the rise behind Gas. The second figure was Bardock. The second figure was Bardock at a speed Bardock did not move at, and the second figure was Bardock with a red at the edge of him that the boy had no word for, and that, on some unspoken level, the boy recognized. Something in Bardock's chest opened. He did not give it permission. It opened on its own. The heat that had begun below the sternum on the cliff 5 years ago. The heat that had been banked in his body for 5 years without his knowing it had been banked. The heat the body had carried as a thing it could spend at the moment the spending was required, it opened. And the opening was not a decision, and the decision had been made by something below the level of decision. He saw his own hands change. He saw them at the corner of his vision as he closed on gas. The knuckles were brighter, the skin was hotter, the veins under the skin were running a color he did not have a word for, and now, this time recognized. His ki rose. It rose past Tora's measurement. It rose past Tora's projection of his upper output. It rose past the level Bardock had reached on the cliff 5 years ago. It rose higher this time because he was older this time, because the body was rebuilt this time, because the spending was not a thing he had not yet learned, but was a thing he had been preparing to spend for 1 minute in the Eastern Valley without knowing he was preparing it. The red came up around him. He closed the 15 meters between himself and Gas in a single movement. He intercepted Gas 3 meters from the shelter doorway. He drove him sideways across the colony's outer ring and into open ground. Gas hit the dirt and was up in the air before he had finished hitting, and the chain that had been in his hand was gone, and a new weapon was forming, and Gas's face was the face from the cliff. It was the face from 5 years ago. The bored grin was gone. The young angry thing underneath it was looking out without anything covering it. Again, Gas said. Again, Bardock said. The fight that followed was the fight from the cliff. It was not the fight from the cliff in any of its details. The details were different. The bowl floor was not the cliff. The light was not the late copper of cereal. The bodies were not the bodies of 5 years ago. The Saiyan in the bowl was a refugee leader with a son in a doorway and a colony at his back, and a hand that had laid Gine to rest, and a hand that had held fascias the night before. The Heater in the bowl was a finished combat asset who had been pricing this fight for 5 years and had decided, against his brother's recall, to take it. The fight from the cliff was the same anyway. Gas committed to his full inner nature corona. Bardock met it. The red around Bardock pulsed with his pulse, and the pulse was running fast, and the red ran with the pulse, and the bowl floor under his feet began to crack from heat rather than from pressure. Gas's first strike came in, and Bardock met it with the back of his forearm, and the weapon shattered. Gas's second came in, and Bardock met it with his open palm, and the weapon shattered. Gas's third was a chain, and the chain extended, and the weight came at Bardock from a low arc, and Bardock caught the weight in his closed fist, and the weight came apart in his hand. Gas's eyes were on his hands. Gas's face was on his face. "What is that?" Gas said. "What is that? You did it again. You did it." Bardock did not respond. He came at Gas. The strikes that followed were the strikes from the cliff at a register the cliff had not seen. Bardock drove Gas across the bowl with a sustained sequence of closed fist strikes that Gas could not, even at full inner nature, sustain a guard against. The inner nature output, which had been pressing Bardock backward across the bowl 4 minutes ago, could not hold against the red. Gas's body took the strikes. Bardock's hands hurt. His chest hurt. The heat in his sternum was climbing, and the climb had a ceiling he could feel coming, and he did not care. Because Gas was still standing, and the only thing that mattered was that Gas stopped standing. Gas, between strikes, asked, "Why? Why do you keep fighting? Why do you keep doing this? Tell me, I want to know." It was the question from the cliff. Bardock gave him the answer from the cliff. Not atonement, a strike. Not revenge, a strike. Only victory, a breath, in a life and death battle. The next strike took Gas in the ribs. Gas absorbed it. He grinned through the absorption. The grin was bloody. The young angry thing was still looking out. "You'll die tired," Gas said. "I told you, you'll die tired." Bardock caught the next weapon strike on his right forearm. He caught it the way he had caught Gas's strike at Vegeta in the central clearing, and the catch was the same catch. and the haft of the weapon snapped in the same way. And the dissolution of the weapon was the same dissolution, and the next motion was a motion Gas read a half second before commit. Bardock's left hand closed on Gas's chest. Bardock hauled. He hauled Gas off the bowl floor and into the air and held him at arm's length, suspended, the chest fisted in Bardock's left hand and the body of Gas held with the casual one-handed lift of a Saiyan operating at a tier above what the body in his hand had been built to resist. Gas's feet were not on the ground. Gas's hands were at the chest plate, trying to pry the fist free, and the fist was not freeing. Bardock's right hand came back. The red compressed around it. The red compressed into a fist at point blank, and the fist filled with the geometry he had been throwing across the engagement, the geometry from the cliff, the geometry he had been throwing since before the evacuation. The riot javelin, the technique he had thrown 100 times in 100 engagements, and had thrown, the night of his own first ascension, in a way that had felt like throwing for the first time. The technique compressed into the right palm at 0 range, and the compression was the compression of every cell of his rebuilt body channeled into a single point that was an inch from Gas's sternum. Gas's eyes met his. He smiled. "Bloody. Doesn't matter," he said. "Cooler knows where you are. My brother sold you. You can't out-train a contract, monkey." Bardock looked at him. "Not tonight," he said. He fired. The riot javelin went through Gas's chest at point blank. It did not exit as a beam. It exited as a beam that had been compressed past the geometry of a beam and was at the moment of exit a thing that was less a beam than a hole, and the hole went through Gas's sternum and out his back and continued upward at the angle of Bardock's wrist. And it bled off into open sky 300 meters above the bowl as a thin line of red light that the colony's perimeter watch would describe, in the reports filed afterward, as the kind of light that was not a thing they had words for. Gas's body went still. Bardock held him for a count, suspended. He held him long enough to register that the body in his hand was not going to move again. He held him long enough to register that the engagement was over. He lowered Gas to the bowl floor. He set him down. He did not drop him. He set him down with the care of a Saiyan who had been raised to set bodies down with care, and he laid Gas on his back on the bowl floor with the eyes still open and the bloody grin still on the face, and he straightened. The red faded from his hands. The heat in his sternum slammed into the ceiling he had felt coming and went past it, and he understood, with the clarity that was the only clear thing in any of this, that he had spent something he did not have to spend. He did not fall. He had been preparing, in some place below the level of preparation, not to fall. He had been preparing because the colony was watching, and because Fasha was at the shelter doorway with the boy behind her, and because the prince was in the medical bay, and the prince did not see his leadership fall, and because Tora was on the ridge that he had won. Bardock did not fall. He stood. He stood with the red gone, and the heat banked again. Lower this time, more controlled, the body knowing the door now and knowing also that the door was closing. He stood with his hands at his sides and Gas at his feet and the bowl quiet around him. The colony watched. Fasha was at the shelter doorway. She had not moved. She had not moved since Gas had come over the eastern fold and Bardock had come over the eastern fold behind him, and she had stood in the doorway with the brace hand half raised and the boy behind her, and the engagement had gone past her, into the bowl floor, beyond the rise, out of her line of sight. She had heard it. She had heard the strikes and the shatter of the weapons and the impact of the red on the rock, and she had heard, finally, the sound the riot javelin made at point blank, which was the sound of a riot javelin that had been compressed past the geometry of a riot javelin. The sound had stopped. She stood in the doorway. Behind her, Kakarot was on his small feet at the threshold. He had crossed the floor of the shelter to stand at her hip. He had not made a sound through any of the engagement. He had watched her watch. He was looking past her now. He could see the rise. He could see, faintly, over the rise, the figure of his father in the bowl. He could not see Gas. Gas was on the bowl floor below the line of the rise. He could see only the standing figure and the red that had faded from the figure's hands, but had left, at the figure's outline, a residual glow that the boy registered as something he had not before seen, but now somehow knew. He looked up at the figure. He pointed. "Dad," he said. It was the only word. It was not a question. It was the recognition. Fasha looked down at him, her brace hand lowered slowly. She looked back at the rise. The figure on the rise turned. Bardock looked across the colony's outer ring, across the eastern fold, across the family shelter, and saw the small figure of his son at her hip with one small arm extended in a point. He saw her hand at her side. He saw her face. He did not raise a hand in return. He did not have the strength to raise a hand and would not have if he had. He looked at them for a long count. He turned. He looked down at the body at his feet. Tora reached him first. He came down off the ridge at a steady jog and crossed the bowl floor and arrived at Bardock's position without speaking. He looked at the body of gas. He looked at Bardock's face. He looked at Bardock's hands, which had returned to looking like Bardock's hands, and which were, on close inspection, trembling slightly at the fingers in the way a hand trembles when it has been used past the working capacity of the body it belongs to. He put one hand on Bardock's shoulder. He did not speak. Bardock knelt. He knelt beside the body. He had not planned to. The knees took him without permission. He went down beside Gas the way a man goes down beside a thing he has finished, and he reached out with his right hand and laid 2 fingers on the dirt beside Gas's open palm, where something small and metallic was half buried in the dust. He picked it up. It was a fragment of a communication device. The plate of a small comm unit, crushed in the middle, the edges still bright from the recent break. The crush pattern was the crush pattern of a hand that had closed on it deliberately and ground the fragments together with the heel of the palm. The fragment Bardock held was the receiver plate. The receiver plate carried, in the small etched script of Heater house marks, the family insignia of the turquoise house, a small bracket and line glyph that meant, in the proprietary script of the Heater family, Elec, head. Bardock turned the fragment in his fingers. Tora, behind him, registered the fragment. "The brother heard," Tora said. "Yes." "The brother heard him taunt you." "Yes." "The brother heard him say that Cooler had paid." "Yes." "The brother heard you win." "Yes." Bardock closed his hand around the fragment. He stood, slowly, with the closed hand at his side. "The brother heard," he said, and left anyway. Tora considered. "Then we get ready for Cooler." "Yes." That was the conversation. Bardock turned from the body. He walked across the bowl floor toward the rise. Tora fell in beside him. Behind them, the body of Gas lay on the dirt with the chest open and the eyes still open and the bowl quiet around him, and somewhere in the deep dark 3 jumps off, on the bridge of a Heater vessel, the family that had run him was completing the transaction with Cooler and lifting off the surveillance drone and turning the vessel away. He reached the eastern fold. Fasha was at the shelter doorway with Kakarot at her hip. She had not moved. He stopped at the doorway. He did not speak. She did not speak. Kakarot reached up with both small hands. Bardock lifted him. The boy settled against his chest with the immediate gravitational certainty of a small body that knew where it was supposed to be, and the small tail wrapped once around Bardock's wrist on the way down and stayed there. Bardock laid his free hand on the back of the small skull. He did not look at Fasha. He did not need to. She laid the back of her hand briefly against the side of his face where the scar was. Her knuckles touched the scar. She left them a count. She took them away. Inside, she said quietly. He went inside. She followed. She closed the door behind them. The colony around them began the slow movement of a colony that had survived an engagement it had not been certain it would survive. The perimeter walks resuming, the medical bay opening, the children's shelters returning to their ordinary functions. Borgos came down off the longhouse wall and went to inspect the structural reserves. Haas stood down from the civilian shelters and gathered his team and went to brief Brassic. Parsa walked across the central clearing toward the family shelter at the unhurried pace of a medic who would be needed inside it and was in no hurry to begin. The aurora came up over the eastern ridge. It came up slowly, the way it always did, the green and the violet shifting against the pale dark of the sky, and the colony's day ended in the small, steady light it ended in every night, and the longhouse stood, and the medical bay stood, and the family shelter stood, with its door closed, with the lamp inside burning, with 3 people inside it, with the fragment of a crushed comm unit in Bardock's pocket, and the body of gas on the bowl floor, and the colony's next war, somewhere out beyond the deep dark, already on its way. The fragment was still in his pocket. He sat on the edge of the cot with the boy asleep in his arms now. The boy had passed out almost immediately on being carried in, the way the boy passed out when the day's adrenaline broke and the small body decided, all at once, that it was done, and he sat with the boy against his chest and fascia across the small room at the table, with her cup of nothing in particular in her hands. And neither of them spoke for a long count. He took the fragment out. He turned it in his fingers. He set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it. She did not touch it. "Cooler," she said. "Cooler. When?" "I don't know. Soon enough that we should not waste time pretending it isn't coming." "All right." She held her cup. She held it for a count. "Bardock." "Yes." "The thing you did." He looked at her. He did not answer immediately. He had not yet decided what the thing was. He had not yet decided whether the thing had a name. He had told Parsa what it had felt like, and he had not told Parsa what it was, because he did not know what it was. And he was not going to invent a name for a thing he did not know the name of. "I don't know what it is," he said. "All right. I will find out." "All right. Parsa told me not to reach for it again. Will you?" He looked at the boy asleep against his chest. "If the alternative is one of you," he said yes. She did not respond. She let the sentence sit. After a while, she reached across the small table and laid her hand on his knee, palm down, the way she had laid it on the family table the night before. She did not curl her fingers. She did not move. She left the hand where it was. He laid his free hand over hers. He did not curl his fingers either. The 2 hands rested on his knee, and the boy slept against his chest, and the lamp burned on the shelf above the table, and the door stayed closed, and somewhere out in the deep dark, on the bridge of a heater vessel turning slowly away from the engagement zone, Elec stood at the viewport with his hands clasped behind his back, and his reflection in the dark glass and the small steady knowledge, settling into him now in the unhurried way knowledge settled into him, that the contract was complete and the family had survived. And the survival had cost him exactly what survival in his family had ever cost, the one of them who had not been pricing. The lamp burned, the colony held, the night went on.